Hello and welcome everybody to this special meeting.
I think we're on mute on Zoom.
Oh. We have a do-over. Good evening, friends. We're so glad to see everybody here. Welcome to our special meeting regarding encampments. With that, we will open it up with the land acknowledgement. The land that Eureka rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Jirojiji. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from Wiyot community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates the city's commitment to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Okay, do we need a roll call? Yes, if we could have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Castellano. Councilmember Moulton.
Here.
Councilmember Fernandez.
Here.
Councilmember Bauer. Councilmember Contreras de Loche.
Here.
Mayor Burgell.
Here. Okay, and with that, we will turn it over to City Manager Slattery.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I need to apologize profusely. There was a mishap with the social media advertising for this meeting. We had set the meeting by agenda at 5 o'clock, and unfortunately, a draft agenda that I had created went out and made it so that most of the local media, as well as our social media, reported this to be started at 5:30. And so I believe that's why Councilmember Bauer is likely not here right now, and maybe some other members of the community who are interested in this topic. So I would recommend that we have a recess and give the opportunity for our elected officials to talk with their constituents, and in the meantime, and to start this meeting after a half-hour recess break.
Okay, so does council have any thoughts on that?
Mayor, I'll move that we go to recess until 5:30 to give folks a chance to show up.
I'll second.
Thank you. Is this just a consent item, so I don't have to do public comment, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Do we need
So
to
we
vote?
have a motion and a second. If we could please vote.
Unanimous yes vote. Motion carries.
Thank you. So, friends, we will reconvene right at 5:30, giving Councilmember Bauer an opportunity to get here, as well as other people who may be interested who aren't here. So, reach out to your council members, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Well, more than a few, but a few.
It's still showing action adjourned. Okay. Oh, okay. So it's okay. And Susan was still there.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
How's it going?
So
Yeah.
just go ahead and pause
Yes.
right there.
And then when Scott, because I'm sure he will be here, do we go back and do?
Okay, friends, thank you for your patience, and thank you for being willing to sit through our recess. And we're back. Just to let you know that public comment will follow the report tonight. It won't be before. And just a little something, I'll remind you again, but for public comment, just so you know, we'll talk about it after. How's that? Okay, we will. So we're going to call up City Manager Slattery to start this conversation.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Once again, I apologize for the timing confusion. So tonight we're here to talk about the guidelines and process for the establishment of a authorized encampment or tiny house. village. And so, okay, for the people on Zoom. Okay. So just for a little review of the agenda, I'm going to start off talking about the background of how we got here and some of the projects that we've done in the past and some of the lessons learned and some of the successes we've had in the past. Then we're going to bring up, I'll be there again, I'll talk about the procedural logistics of what we learned and kind of the process to go through from a staff perspective and from council's perspective. And then we're going to bring up
for the audio on Zoom.
Thank you, Supervisor Arroyo.
how'd you know that was her?
It was me.
I recognize her voice. Yes.
So once again, I'll be going over the background of how we got here and some of the projects that we've done in the past and the successes and lessons learned from those projects. I'll talk about the emergency shelter ordinance and kind of the procedural logistics of what it would look like to establish an authorized encampment or sanctioned camp. And then we'll bring up our assistant planner, Melissa Smith, to talk about the zoning and the effects of the emergency shelter ordinance on zoning and what kind of variances are allowed. And then we'll bring up our chief building official, Brendan Riley, to talk about the same thing as it relates to building, as it relates to our emergency shelter ordinance. And then I'm hoping, I don't see them here yet, but we should have a representative from the county, supervising planner Michael Richardson, to talk about their shelter ordinance and their safe parking program that they've established over there. And then after that, as Mayor Bigel discussed, we'll do a modified version of question and answers for public comment. Assistant City Manager Powell, can you click it for me? I don't have the touch. So, just as a background, we started this. We've had a shelter crisis for a very long time. Some of the projects that we first started with. Can you click it over one? There we go. So in 2015, the city went through a request for proposal process for homeless services. The intent of this RFP process was to solicit respondents to offer up services to establish an authorized encampment. We went through that process. We received a response for that. The response wasn't in alignment with what the RFP was requesting, and we didn't select anybody for that process. Soon after that, the city went through the issues that we had at Palco Marsh. During that time, we knew that we needed to provide places for folks to go when we were addressing those issues. So at that time, we established some rotating camps. We established rotating camps at the Del Norte parking lot location, at the Marina Way location across from Dock B, as well as Washington and Coster, the current location for Betty's Blue Angel Village. When we did that, it was, I guess you could say it was operated by the city, but not in any sort of formal way. It was basically just opening up a location for folks to go. And then every week, I believe, or every 2 weeks, we would rotate them, have our staff clean up the areas and prepare the other areas for people to rotate to. That lasted approximately 6 months. Was the biggest problem that we had was basically the safety of the people that were there. There was a lot of issues there because the oversight wasn't there. There was no guidance. There was no rules. It really was not safe for those people that were staying there. Then after that, we worked with GCOP at the time, and I'm sorry I don't remember what that stands for, but they had established parameters and guidelines for a tiny home village. We started it first at 3rd and Commercial. It was through a lease that we had on Mercer Fraser's property there. It started out there, had a lot of public meetings to discuss it. Council elected to move forward with it. We used some Connex boxes that were modified in order to use those as tiny homes. The pilot project worked out well there. The lease that we had with Mercer Fraser was up, and so we relocated Blue Angel Village over to the Washington and Coster site. It's been there ever since. There was a lot of concern related to that project because of the local businesses that were in the area. It's been extremely successful. I would say the vast majority of those people that have concerns have realized that it's worked out very well, and it's been a success. And so that's definitely one of our success stories of establishing a sanctioned camp or a tiny home village. Soon thereafter, during that process, we adopted a resolution, an emergency shelter resolution. What this did was allow us to designate locations to locate emergency shelters, and that allowed for some of these variances that our planning and building staff will talk about. That following year, we were looking at a location. I've been here for 17 years. A lot of the concerns that we've had from both advocates and business owners is that folks don't have a place to go during the day. And so staff worked very long time to find a location and an operator of a day center. We did that. We had guidelines and a procedure from Betty Chin's foundation to operate a day center. We had a location on Wabash that was agreed upon by the property owner. We went out to the public, had a bunch of public meetings. There was a lot of outcry about that, and it didn't get approved. And so that was not successful. After that, the city worked with Betty Chin once again, established a Women and Children Center across from her day center on on C Street. And that's in effect now, and the city helped to establish that with the same shelter ordinance. After that, in 2020, we tried to work with local community members and a local agency to establish an authorized encampment. We met for approximately 4 months. Had some really good discussions, came up with some guidelines to present to council. The idea being that we develop these guidelines, get an agreement from council about how an authorized encampment would work, get approval for that, and then use that as a tool to go out to the public and do community engagement about finding a location. We got to the end of it. It wasn't. It never occurred. It didn't end up happening. We do have those guidelines in the discussions. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I don't want to make that feel like that's the only way it can be done. We want to be able to adjust and make any decisions on what's best for our community. After that, in 2021, the state passed some regulations that required those with a resolution for emergency shelter to adopt an ordinance. And so in 2021, we did adopt an ordinance. It's a little bit more elaborate than our shelter, but the basic premise of the ordinance is similar to the resolution. And so that's what we're under right now. I believe it goes until 2026. And so we'll be under that until at least then. So it still provides our ability to do emergency shelter ordinances. Authorized encampments. And then in 2021, another success. It's not necessarily a shelter, but what it is it's a tiny home village that we had a similar agreement as we have with Betty Blue Angel Village. They have 2 tiny homes. And I'll tell you the process that we had to go through, but that's another success story that we have in place and has been supported by the city.
Excuse me just one moment. Mm-hmm. Is room 207 available for folks that are standing, or do we have room for folks that are standing? Oh, it's not being broadcast. Okay. There's a lot of people standing, and I don't know how comfortable that will be over time. So. Can we add another row, maybe? I'm sorry to interrupt you, City Manager Slattery.
That's okay. So, should I continue or do you want to wait until the rows continue? I'll wait. Okay.
I just think pertinent to our timeline too are the emergency shelters at the south end of town.
Excuse me?
Just pertinent to our timeline are the emergency shelters or the shelters at the south end of town in the Elk River area that we're in the process of putting in.
Oh. So yes, it is. So we've designated the Crowley property. So that's the property on Hillthicker. So yeah, that's another one that Assistant Planner Smith will discuss about as well. But that's in the process right now. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, friends. There are seats in the front row, front row seats available for you today. We'd love to have you come sit down and feel comfortable. Thank you. And continue on.
So what Councilmember Castellano had brought up is we went through a really long process on a property that's owned by the city on Hillthicker. That was a much more elaborate process where we actually had to change the zoning and create a unique zoning code for that location. As a part of our, just as a side note, as a part of our update to our local coastal program, we plan on extending that zone, so there may be more available locations similar to that, but that established its own zoning location. We designated it as an emergency shelter site, and then we got out grant funding, and so that will have, I believe, 33 units that'll be going in. They won't be shelter units, but they will be transitional/permanent supportive housing that'll be put in at that location. To move on to the procedural logistics, through all of this process, staff have been doing this for many years now. We feel that what's been successful, and also through the research that we've done and looking at different studies from across the nation, is to establish guidelines for the camps, establish a responsible party for that camp, establish guidelines, rules, parameters for community engagement, parameters for reporting, those things first, and make sure that we're in a place where we're going to have a successful project, not only for the community, but definitely for those that are staying at the location. And so the process from staff's perspective would include what we were similarly trying to do in 2020. Any party who's interested in doing this would sit down with staff, establish these guidelines, provide a framework and a description of those guidelines, bring them to council, seek approval for that, and then from that point go forward and look at locations. For site approval and for designation, for the city of Eureka, it's very unique. The county has a different procedure for this, but for the city of Eureka, the most feasible way of doing this is whether it's private or city-owned property or another agency's owned property. The best way to do it and still allow for the variances in the zoning code and the building code is for the city to lease that property. Very similar to what we've done at St. Vincent de Paul and what we did at Betty's Blue Angel Village prior to it moving. The idea being that the city leases the property for a very low amount, then we are able to lax some of those building codes and some of those zoning codes so that we can have a successful location that is less costly and also quicker to make happen. Right now, we currently require as a part of our ordinance that if a new location is added to our shelter ordinance, basically, that we have to come to council and put it onto agenda and get approval for that location. We intend on coming back to council and amending that ordinance so that process won't be necessary, and so that through the process is approving the guidelines and the location is enough rather than having to add it to a resolution. any location that's developed very similar to all of our other shelter locations, the city would still provide all the social services programming that we currently do, as we do with the rescue mission, with Betty's, and with all of the other locations in town. We would still provide our outreach services. We'd still provide all the services that Uplift provide. We would still provide, our developing mental health services that we're beginning to provide right now. So that's definitely something that the city could do. Similar to other locations that we currently now, there's also an ability for the city to help potentially with whether it's utility or whether it's with garbage bills or something like that we've helped with other agencies. Right now, the city doesn't have the staff or the funding to operate this, but we do have the ability to assist in any way that we can, whether it be with property or the services that I had just mentioned. So next, we're going to have Assistant Planner Smith come up and talk about the zoning aspects of the emergency shelter ordinance. And I believe this is the first time, so welcome, Assistant Planner Smith.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. As Miles mentioned, this is my first presentation to City Council. So thanks for having me. My name is Melissa Smith. I'm assistant planner, and I'm here on behalf of the Development Services Department Planning. And I'm going to present today. My presentation today is going to focus on emergency shelters and where the city allows them based on our zoning code, as well as the Emergency Shelter Crisis Act. So the two main factors that help us determine where an emergency shelter is allowed is the city's adopted zoning regulations and the Emergency Shelter Crisis Act. The city's zoning code divides the city land into zones and includes specific rules and regulations for each zone. Emergency shelters are allowed by the zoning code in certain zones, and the Emergency Shelter Crisis Act, a state law, allows for deviation from local zoning regulations to allow emergency shelters more broadly. First, I want to discuss how emergency shelters are allowed by the city's zoning code. California Senate bill passed in 2007 requires local zoning codes to facilitate shelter development by identifying at least one zone where emergency shelters are principally permitted without the need for a use permit, and only including limited objective standards for emergency shelters, such as provisions for on-site management and length of stay. The city has amended the zoning code to be consistent with SB 2. It is important to note that because part of the city is in the coastal zone, we have separate coastal and inland zoning code regulations. Emergency shelters are allowed by the inland zoning code in two zones. In these zones, emergency shelters are principally permitted and would not require a use permit. The first is the service commercial zone, which is seen in red on the map. And the other is the hinge industrial zone, which is seen in purple on the map. They would be held to the inland emergency shelter standards of the zoning code, which include allowing emergency shelters in buildings or open spaces, and shelters cannot be located within 1,000 feet from a school or 50 feet from another shelter. In coastal zones, in the coastal portion of the city, there are 3 zones that allow emergency shelters. In these zones, emergency shelters are principally permitted, which means they would not need a use permit. The first zone is the commercial service district, which is seen in red on the map. Next is the limited industrial district, which is seen in light purple on the map. And last is the general industrial district, which is seen in dark purple on the map. Depending on the project, a coastal development permit may be required. And zoning regulations found in Article 2.5 of the Coastal Zoning Code also apply. Same as the inland regulations, the coastal regulations state emergency shelters can be located within buildings or open spaces and include requirements that emergency shelters cannot be located within 1,000 feet of a school and cannot be located within 300 feet of another emergency shelter. Which brings me to the Emergency Shelter Crisis Act. Recently, California adopted the Emergency Shelter Crisis Act, which allows local governments to ignore certain local standards, including local zoning, during a declared shelter crisis. If a city declares a local emergency shelter crisis, as Eureka did in 2016, under the Emergency Shelter Crisis Act, the city is allowed to adopt relaxed building codes, which we did in 2021, and building official Riley will discuss these relaxed standards, which allow for tents, tiny homes, and mobile homes to be used for emergency shelters in addition to existing buildings. The Shelter Crisis Act also allows for the temporary suspension of zoning regulations. However, there are some important caveats. The act only applies to city-owned or controlled sites. And currently, City Council, as Miles alluded to, must designate each site by resolution. This is a city-imposed hurdle that we plan to remove. Additionally, environmental laws still apply, including CEQA and the Coastal Act. So how does the Shelter Crisis Act change where emergency shelters are allowed? In the inland zone, it changes things quite a bit. In the inland portion of the city, any city-owned or controlled site can be used as an emergency shelter, meaning if a property owner wanted to use their property as an emergency shelter, they would have to enter into a lease agreement with the city, allowing for any parcel in the inland portion of the city to be an emergency shelter, seen in green on the map. As stated before, local zoning and planning standards do not need to be adhered to, but basic health, safety, and welfare standards must be met. Environmental review is still required, and the site must be designated as an emergency shelter site by City Council as of now. In the coastal zone, where emergency shelters are allowed stays the same, because although the Emergency Shelter Crisis Act allows for local zoning regulations to be suspended, the local coastal program, which is the zoning and land use regulations for the coastal portion of the city, act as state law under the Coastal Act, and the Shelter Crisis Act only suspends local regulations. Thus, emergency shelters must adhere to land use policies and zoning regulations in the local coastal program, and projects in the portion of the city may require a coastal development permit and will be subject to environmental review. But coastal sites designated as emergency shelters are allowed to adhere to the relaxed building code standards for emergency shelters. If you are wondering what zone a parcel is in, there's a couple ways that you can find out. You can visit the city website, eurekaca.gov, and you can search for our web GIS portal. And in the upper left-hand corner, you can search by address, or, which I think is easier, you could call Development Services Planning, and we would be happy to tell you what zone your parcel is in. I'm going to finish my presentation by discussing the sites that we have already designated as emergency shelter sites, as well as the shelters previously permitted before the shelter crisis was declared. One site designated under the Emergency Shelter Crisis Resolution is located in the southern portion of the city and was designated for Betty Quan Chin's community housing. This is, I believe, what was referred to as the Hilfiger property. The remainder of the sites are located in the northwest portion of the city. And so zooming in a little bit closer, the city has designated the Custer, Washington site at 801 West Washington. This is formerly the Blue Angel Village. We also have 205 7th Street for Betty Quan Chin's Family and Women's Shelter, as well as St. Vincent de Paul's at 35 West 3rd Street. Beyond these designated sites, we have previously permitted 2 locations to be shelters as well. One is the Eureka Rescue Mission Men's Shelter at 110 2nd Street, and the other is Betty Kwan Chin's Family Shelter at 624 Street, which is next door to the Betty Kwan Chin Day Center and across from the previously mentioned Betty's Family and Women's Shelter. That concludes my presentation, and I can turn it over to our building official, Brendan.
You have one, right? Yeah. Get it. And is this yours? So share screen. This is not the one I wanted. Hang on.
To the mayor, pardon me while Brandon's getting some folks in the crowd are saying it's hot out there. Is there a way to turn down? I think maybe the heater's on.
Mayor Bigel, do you know how to turn on the AC?
I do not, but generally I don't like it. Is there a way, though, to get some air back there for folks?
I think
Yeah, I can
the
turn on
windows
the
can be
Yeah,
cracked.
give us a
Yeah.
second.
Thank you.
Okay, there you go.
So
In the
great to have a
meantime,
lot
the
of
windows
folks
can
here.
be opened.
Should I wait for?
You're good.
Go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Brendan Riley, the Chief Building Official for the City of. Yeah, it's on. Can you hear now? Is that? Okay. How about now? Okay. I'm Brendan Riley. I'm the Chief Building Official for the City of Eureka, and we're here to talk about Appendix AZ of the Emergency Housing. It comes from Appendix AZ of the California Residential Code, and this must be invoked during a declared state of emergency, local emergency, or shelter crisis, as we're in one now. Options under Appendix AZ are available on city-owned or leased property, but can be operated by private entities. And there are 3 main types of emergency housing facilities under Appendix AZ. There are emergency sleeping cabins, which are essentially tiny homes. There are emergency transportable housing units, which are like tiny homes on wheels. And then membrane structures, which are tents. There's some facility requirements that will apply to all 3 types of structures. And that is, they need to have a minimum of 70 square feet per occupant. And then additional occupants require 50 square feet apiece. Potable drinking water must be available either in the unit or on site. A kitchen is either to be included with the unit, or common kitchen facilities meeting ADA accessibility standards be provided. And then a bathroom is either to be included or an accessible toilet and bathing facility for every 15 occupants of each gender need to be provided. And these need to be equipped with running water, heated to a minimum of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Fire safety requirements can be determined by the local authority, and in our case, this would be the Humboldt Bay Joint Powers Authority. And the facilities must be maintained in a safe sanitary condition, free from vermin and vectors and other matter of infectious or contagious nature. ADA accessibility is required even with the membrane structures. And this is in accordance with the California Building Code, Chapter 11B, for membrane structures or the sleeping cabins, and operators are responsible for providing the minimum number of accessible units under the code. And then for transportable housing, accessibility is in accordance with the U.S. Access Board's final guidelines for emergency transportable housing. So the first type of emergency housing facility are the sleeping cabins, and these can be conventional construction. They require a minimum of 80 inches of ceiling height, 2 forms of egress, which usually are just a door and a window, a continuous source of electricity, a light and one GFCI outlet, natural or mechanical ventilation, and then smoke and carbon monoxide alarms are required. The carbon monoxide alarms are actually not required if there are no gas facilities in the structure. The emergency transportable housing units are essentially the same requirements as the sleeping cabins, but they have an additional requirement to comply with Safety Code Division 13, Part 2, Title 25, Division 1, Chapter 3, Subchapter 2, which is a long way of saying the mobile home codes. And then the third type of structure are the membrane structures or tents. The Appendix AZ code requirements are triggered when a facility's offer stays over 7 days. And these structures require that there are wooden floors that are raised at least 4 inches over grade or concrete slabs raised 4 inches above grade with 6-inch curbs on all sides. And they also must be provided with heat suitable to maintain a minimum temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And either electric or hydronic means of heating can be used in the slabs and floors. And that is all we have from the building code. This one is a pretty straightforward, kind of short and sweet code. It's very compact and very user friendly. But if anybody does have questions, they can feel free to email.
And I'll just add, and Chief Building Official Riley will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the minimum ADA requirement is 5% of the units.
So yeah, okay. So for anything that's in Chapter 11B, so that would be the membrane structures or the sleeping cabins, those would be required 10% ADA accessible units, and then all common, so like common kitchens, common baths, those need to be on an accessible path of travel. For the trailers, there for whatever reason, there's a lesser requirement, which is 5% of them need to be accessible. And then any kind of common stuff like a kitchen or bathroom, again, would have to be on an accessible path.
Okay, thank you, Chief Building Official Riley and Assistant Planner Smith. Shannon, do you see, excuse me, Assistant to the City Manager Fazio, do you see Michael Richardson or Mary Milner? He's here. Oh, he's here. Right. Hey, yeah. We have with our supervising planner with Humboldt County, Michael Richardson. He is going to discuss components of their emergency shelter ordinance as well as their safe parking ordinance. Thank you for being here.
Yes, my pleasure. Good evening, City Council members. Michael Richardson. I'm with the Humboldt County Planning Department, and I saw our presentation up there. That's it. Yeah. There you go. Okay. Great. So we just last year had our Board of Supervisors approve what we're calling a safe parking, safe shelter pilot program. This is, because it's a pilot program, it's only on the books for 18 months, and it's going to automatically expire at that time, but it could be renewed if it's successful, or at least it doesn't cause any problems, and that's what we're hoping. Basically, the idea is it provides a way of kind of extending the ladder down for people who can't make it into an RV park or mobile home park, can't find an apartment. This is intended to set up a place where people can either live in an RV or a tent, and it would be basically a sanctioned safe parking area. Like your city, the Board of Supervisors also adopted at the same time a shelter crisis ordinance, and that was in order to allow for these alternative building codes, reduced building codes for these structures. We've got a couple of different types of visions here. We've got the safe parking, which would just accommodate automobiles and RVs, and then we've got also a safe shelter version of the allowance, which accommodates more permanent structures, although they can be very temporary in nature. And so you could have a tent, for instance, would fall into the safe shelter paradigm. Here's a table that kind of explains the different visions for the management of these facilities. We have kind of on the left is the minimal requirement, and then over to the right is something that is going to be more intensive and requires more management. So this minimal requirements plan is restricted to just overnight guests. They would need to leave the premises during the day. You could have up to 20 units in these facilities, and you could accommodate people for up to 6 months. Getting into the more sophisticated version, the village model of the plan, and when I say plans, we've got kind of pre-approved plans. They're 8 or 9 pages long, and they identify what all of the requirements are for people that want to set these things up on their properties. And our intent here is to kind of leverage the private sector into providing some of these services. And so it's not just the county that would be potentially developing these services, but a church or some other nonprofit group could as well. And so with the village model plan, they can be, people can stay there during the night, just overnight, or they could be kind of more of a 24/7 sort of facility. 15 units or cabins or tents are available or are the maximum in these facilities, and then once again it's 6 months. And then we get to the most intensive and regulated version of these sort of safe parking, safe shelter sites, and that is the low barrier management plan. And that can, again, be 24/7, can accommodate up to 20 units, and the length of stay is as determined by the provider. And you guys just learned about the shelter crisis ordinance. It's our version mirrors yours as well. And that's about it. This is Mary's dog on a beach here in Eureka. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, so I appreciate it, Michael. So we'll convene. So what we're going to do, well, the mayor will explain what we're going to do. So we're ready for public comment, and you can describe.
Questions from council first?
We can do that or after. That's up to you.
Well, let's start with public comment. So just to let you know, public comment today, you'll still have your 3 minutes. Pursuant to the Brown Act, Section 54954, the public shall be provided an opportunity to speak only on items that are listed on the special meeting agenda. So what we're talking about this evening. And then pursuant to City Council Resolution 2011-22, City Council policy is to limit each speaker to 3 minutes. Such time allotment or portion thereof shall not be transferred to other speakers. Tonight we're doing it a little differently. So your 3 minutes, you'll be able to ask questions. And what will happen is we'll stop the clock and get the answers to your questions for you in the moment. And then the clock will begin again. We do ask, though, that there are quite a few people here, so if you could be respectful of the time, and if you do have further questions after you've had your time, certainly reach out to your council members, reach out to me, City Manager Slattery. We're happy to listen and see what we can do to work together.
Mayor Bigel, can we make a little modification? Because I think something that would be more efficient is if we, during the 3-minute period, they can list off questions.
Okay.
And then when they're done with their 3 minutes periods, we'll answer those questions that are incorporated into that 3 minutes. We're trying to avoid the stop,
100%.
start.
So as heard here, that is the procedure. And so do we have anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this item? Come on up. Come on up. Welcome. Hi.
My name is Stonewalker Horse. I've been here a number of times. Jesus said there will always be poor. The only reason I mention it is because I think probably everybody here is familiar with the piercing of the hands, the stigmata. And one of the greatest problems the homeless have to deal with is the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
Like stigmata, but instead of blood all over the place, it's actually a case of pride in being, pride in community, pride in being here. And the one thing that is most lacking all over the place is any reason for anybody out there freezing to feel proud.
Thank you.
And if members wishing to speak want to line up on either side of the room, it does make it a little more efficient as you come up to the microphone. We'll go back and forth from each side. Thank you.
So to the right, would you come up, please? Okay, to the left, would you be willing to come up? You guys are wonderful. Let's have one of you. Come on up.
Well, I have like a 10-minute presentation.
Oh.
I'm trying to whittle that down.
Oh, so did you want to wait then?
If she went first, that would
Okay. Oh, my goodness. Thank you. We appreciate you.
I've been a resident in Eureka for quite some time. Oh, I didn't want to talk on that. Well, I'm wondering about the mental wellness of people. And, you know, pets that a lot of times are considered to be like an extra or an expense rather and their own, their own. But a lot of times that is the one connection that people have to being approved of or being accepted and wanted. People that want to talk about, you know, that they're just tired of working to support a drug addict, mental ill person that doesn't give a damn and doesn't want to work for themselves. You know, that's really not what's happening. That those people need to take that energy instead of stressing out on it and go down. And mental health is made better when a person has a one-on-one contact with someone. So all the taxpayers that want to complain about they're working for somebody that's not doing anything, go take 10 minutes a day and find out what they want. People's needs and their wants are very different. So not to, you know, accommodate their wants, but to see that their needs are met and just to let them know that somebody cares. And it doesn't take, you know, stall you out on going home, you know, right away, putting your feet up. But you get a better idea of what it is that's really happening. And I have had people tell me they don't know that anybody in here is even qualified or capable of coming up with the being able to make the financial decisions because, you know, just keep giving Danco more money and it's not, the grants are not being used like for bathrooms in town and things like that. The showers, the mobile showers are so helpful. They go all around in the county, and City of Eureka should be proud to be able to fund that, pay for all the water, pay for all the gas, pay for employment for people to be able to go. They give them clean clothes. There's sanitary showers. You know, it took a long time for this situation to develop, and it's going to take a long time before it's solved. So let's just keep working with what it is that is good, and showers are good. And the fact that that shower can move around and it's more sanitary than a motel is fantastic. So I think that we could maybe have a different outlook on what it is that we're dealing with. It's not just money and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So, friends, we are not going to clap, or you can do one of these. It just takes up too much time, and sometimes it makes people to feel uncomfortable if someone's saying something negative or positive. So I appreciate your willingness to support that. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Scott Graham. I got here late, and I was having trouble on my computer actually listening to the meeting. The sound didn't come through very well, and I couldn't find it on TV. Anyway, so I don't know, is there a timeline as to how soon you can get this stuff up and running? Because the emergency's tonight. You know, the emergency was last week. The emergency's last year. When can we expect this to happen? Is it going to, is this just going to languish somewhere, and, people are just going to mull over it and it doesn't happen? On 8th Street, I think it's by 9th, there's a abandoned building right down from the Veterans Hall. That would be a perfect place to put homeless veterans. So I don't know if there's still any of that room key money running around the state, but maybe you could get some and, have a place for homeless veterans. On 5th Street, there's a couple of motels that are in bad condition that may be being fixed now. I don't know if they're being fixed for homeless people, but that should be a priority, to actually have buildings, places for them to go. I don't know if you're going to, put people out in a mud lot like you did last time. I mean, what's the real plan here? Is there a place that you have in mind where you're going to put people? And how many people? I mean, from what that slideshow that I just saw, there's there'll be enough places for 60 people. I think there's over 500 homeless people in the city of Eureka. So if you're only going to take care of 60 of them, what's going to happen to the other 450? I mean, somewhere, somehow, things have to happen. The compassion, our human compassion has to come out, and we have to help you. These are human beings. They're not animals, and everybody has problems. Buddha said, the part of life is suffering. And so everybody suffers on a different level. And those people out on the streets are suffering more than any of us in this room. So we should really be trying our best to help these people and give them a lift up instead of constantly pushing them down. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And City Manager Slattery, would you like to address these questions?
Thank you, sir. So as far as the time frame to do this, ideally it depends on what it looks like. I mean, we can't really tell how long it will take. I can tell you this: if we had a program in place that was approved by council, this could happen as soon as another council meeting, as long as the provisions are in place to meet the guidelines that we just described. I can tell you this has been a priority for our staff for a very long time. I think we've made a heck of a lot of headway. I had those discussions back in 2020. It came very close to coming up with a solution. Didn't happen. I've had conversations as recently as last month with an agency that's interested in doing this. We had conversations with EPD and our Uplift staff with another agency approximately 4 months ago. So this is an ongoing thing that we've been doing for a long time. Just as recently as the Women and Family Shelter that we established, from the St. Vincent de Paul one that we established. Those things happened in government terms rapidly. And so I would say that this could happen, but doing what we're trying to talk. That's why I talked about the lessons learned. There was one muddy property that was on there. The other two were paved, but those were not successful. If we're going to do this, we need to make it so that it's successful. Betty's Blue Angel Village has been extremely successful. St. Vinny's been extremely successful. We want this to be long term and not just a Band-Aid solution. So we are supportive of this. We have been working with many agencies that have been looking into doing this, and we will continue to do so. Oh, and as far as the home key, we apply for home key every year. We have about 3 or 4 properties that we're trying to apply for home key now, and that's NOFA's out in April, I believe, or it's due in April, one of the two. But either way, we will be going after that. We have a very hopeful outlook on a property that would provide a significant amount of shelter spaces. But A, we have to be competitive, and B, it has to pencil out. But we will definitely be pursuing home key this year again.
Thank you. Did that cover the questions? Did that cover all the questions that we captured? Great, thank you. So now we'll come over to Ms. Griffith. Ms. Griffith.
Thank you. I initially just had a couple of questions, but inspired by that last gentleman, I did want to say I moved here 6 years ago, and throughout the course of wandering around the city of Eureka in that time, there have been buildings that the entire time have sat vacant. And it would be really amazing to see the city do something, whether that's a vacancy tax, an occupancy incentive, if there's some way to motivate those property owners. My understanding is that many of them do not live in the area, and so they don't really have they actually have a financial incentive to not rent those properties so that they can claim a tax break on it. But whatever we can do to make sure that those are actually occupied would be amazing. I have 2 questions. One is, it said that this could happen on any city-owned or city-controlled property or site. And you mentioned that you would lease something from a property owner, but are there already city-owned sites that have been identified that could be used? And follow up to that, you said this would take a little while to get anything implemented. Is there a possibility of using any of these sites or lifting any of the prohibitions on camping in the interim so that people can be in a settled, safe space in community while this is being developed? Thanks.
Thank you. City Manager Slattery.
So as far as locations, and the many iterations that we'd done this in past, where it was the RFP process or the rotating camps, we have identified sites. Since then, many of those sites that we've looked at previously have either been used, Washington and Coster being one, the Hillficker property being another. Other properties that were looked at were underneath the Samoa Bridge. That's currently under a lease. That would not be made available. What's another property? The property that's in the coastal zone, because of those regulations, would be a significant time in order to do it, and it's coastal dependent industrial, so that property would not be usable this time. Those are the ones that we looked at that were city owned. One of the unfortunate things about the property that city owns is it is in the coastal zone, and as you saw from the map from Assistant Planner Smith, it makes it very restrictive when you're in that area. We don't own any light industrial property, and we don't own any service commercial. Well, we do own some service commercial property, but that's developed. That was the England Marine site. So that's why we're limited on city-owned property. That's not to say it can't happen. It'll just be a more difficult process. Other questions about temporary? This is, according to state law, considered to be a fast track. I would have to get back to council and to you, Carolyn, about if that is possible. I think we'd need to do more research on that. I'm not aware of anything technically that would allow for a complete we're just going to do this for a short period of time and start it right away without complying with the stuff that we just discussed.
Thank you.
I believe there was one more question about the lifting of, or the camping ordinance for a short period of time too.
So that technically could happen. I think from staff's perspective, we'd have the same concerns about the rotating camp and not having any oversight. I think that would it would be a council decision, but that would be extremely difficult to manage.
There was also a question about buildings that are vacant now that are not controlled by the city. And Carolyn is right. There are lots of vacant buildings, and I know that the city has discussed some kind of tax on, absentee owners, which is a possibility. We could certainly look at that. But I will say that it doesn't guarantee that those buildings will then be occupied. I think that examples of that from other cities show that many owners will choose to just pay that. So we are aggressively pursuing other options with those buildings that could potentially be put into receivership, fixed up, and come back into the housing stock. So that's something that the city is already pursuing. Of course, it is, a labor-intensive pursuit. It requires court intervention, and we do it, a couple at a time, but as fast as we can. Because I agree, it's frustrating to see empty houses when we have homeless people on the street.
And we are in the process of doing a vacancy incentive / tax that's going to be coming back to council soon. There are a lot of concerns about its efficacy, and there are a lot of concerns about what that will do, whether it'll be successful. I think the incentive, we'll bring it back to council. Our economic development is working on it now, and it'll be coming back to council soon. And we do look at those properties. The one that the gentleman talked about on H Street, we looked at that property. That property has a permit now in to get redone. We looked at that for Home Key. We looked at, I can't tell you how many buildings that we've looked at in order to get it. A lot of the problems that you have is Home Key is going to be the funding source for that, and you have to have a willing property owner. A lot of these property owners are aware of Home Key, and they have unrealistic prices for their properties that wouldn't be supported by the grant funding, and it doesn't allow for those to be modified in order for them to work as housing.
Thank you. Come on up.
Hi, so I'm speaking as a recently turned adult who has grown up in Humboldt County my entire life. This is definitely more of like opinions. Of course, if you have any stuff you want to address, the main problem I have with these housing, like these temporary shelters, is that that's it. They're only temporary. Is there going to be other ways for people to fast track to get permanent housing? Because what I'm saying is that nobody wants their end goal to be homelessness forever. Everyone wants their end goal to be in like a stable position and to live a basic life with their basic needs met. And it's just, because one of the members mentioned about this potentially like trying for this to not be a Band-Aid solution. And I'm wondering if there's like any other, because I've worked at a couple places and everywhere is so full and so packed and the waiting lists are so long. Will there be other stuff to like sort of help like get these people who are in these temporary shelters into a more permanent solution if they choose to reach out and do so?
Great question. Yes, there definitely is. That's some of the services that I talked about with our Uplift program. Over the past 3 years, we've housed about 152 community members out of homelessness as a part of that. The project that we're talking about on Hillthicker is actually a graduation project from Betty Chin's village. It basically is intent to start off in the village and then you graduate to the property on Hillthicker, and so that'll open up some more spaces for transitional / permanent supportive housing. So we've been extremely successful in getting funding thanks to Department of Health and Human Services at the county of getting funding. We do have funding still, and as a part of all of our visits to the shelters with our outreach workers, we always offer up housing assistance funds. Those housing assistance funds are extremely generous. They can be up to 6 months. They provide for first and last, everything else that is needed to get somebody in there. And so we do have those services, and that was part of the Uplift program that I spoke about earlier.
Thank you. Come on up on the left, please. My left.
Left's a relative term.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. My name's Sequoia, and I've worked with some of you on the village projects. Been trying to push for something like that to happen for a few years now. And I think the takeaway at this point, I mean, my experience has been that the city of Eureka and the city of Arcata have been very receptive to the idea of a tiny house village, but and very willing to meet and discuss it. But I think now is the time for the city to become more proactive and really be pushing for these sorts of things, which I'm really happy you guys are having this meeting tonight, because it shows that that might be the direction things are heading. But I think the big, what Miles pointed out, is that the strategy at this time has been, find an organization that can present a palatable proposal and then go from there. I would urge council to consider pushing for properties to be allocated and prepared for these types of projects, and then be putting out proactively trying to find organizations that can make proposals that would fit those sites, because that's one of the biggest hurdles is the location, and it's always ambiguous. And if it was just determined that that needs to be prioritized as ready these locations, and then reach out. I also wanted to say that there's not an all of the above approach that's going to solve this situation. From my experience meeting individuals who are experiencing homelessness, there's as big of a variety of backgrounds and circumstances as people who are housed. There's all sorts of different stories and preferred circumstances. Some people want to camp out in the woods legally. Some people want to live in a micro house or a shelter. And other people really want to just get on their feet and get into the, a traditional home. But I think we need to hit it from every angle and be bold and, don't crumble in the face of NIMBYism, and be willing to not have things be perfect, but just do what's going to be looked back upon in 10 years as the thing that set Eureka on the right course, as opposed to taking the easy path that just kicks the can down the road, because we've seen this problem, and it's only getting worse with the collapse of the marijuana industry and climate change, et cetera. So I appreciate everybody for making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sequoia. And on my right. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Price, and I have some concerns with the proposal. Fundamentally, I think it kind of misassesses the fundamental core problem here, which is a drug and a mental health crisis, and I'm not sure how having these sanctioned camps really addresses that core issue. I also have some concerns about enforcement mechanisms. What are we going to do to ensure that this doesn't devolve into what our unsanctioned homeless camps look like right now? I'm sure many of you saw the Times Standard front page article this weekend from the Arcata Marsh. We know that if we have sanctioned homeless camps, we're going to have harm reduction there. We're going to have needles there. Who's cleaning it up? Who's administering the Narcan? Who's ensuring public safety? Who's ensuring that this doesn't devolve into a situation that we've had over and over again in this community? I grew up here, whether it's the Palco Marsh or the South Jetty. If you don't have structure, if you don't have mechanisms of enforcement in place, it will devolve into what all of our unsanctioned homeless camps already look like here. So I have some serious concerns about that. I also wonder, does this work anywhere else? I mean, I'm an airline pilot, so I fly around the U.S. fairly often, and I can tell you that the West Coast cities far and away, and the statistics bear this out, have the worst homeless crisis, and they also are all already doing this. I mean, during COVID, we had San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Portland, they've all done this and it didn't work. It just increased homelessness. The data's there. And it also increased overdose deaths. I mean, again, we have a drug crisis right now. We have an opioid crisis that turned into now a fentanyl crisis. And, there's no amount of harm reduction that's going to stop people from overdosing if we don't get them treatment. So I'd really like to see the focus on, and this isn't just something we can solve in this city, but we can focus on mental health. We can focus on rehab. And we can support what people like Betty Chin are doing that have a structured approach that gets people the help they need when they're ready for it, that has standards and that helps them get on a path to employment and to health, that is compassionate while also having a sense of accountability for the people. Homeless people also have agency. They do make choices. Many of them have come from very hard circumstances, but they still have agency. So let's not take that away. So I don't want to see this turn into another Skid Row, another Tenderloin, another Blade. I've been to these cities and it's not good what's happening there. And it's not fair to the residents who live here, who are law abiding, who want to raise our kids here. I have 3 young children. I have a wife who likes to run in this city. She doesn't feel safe running on many of the coastal trails in this area because of the homeless encampments, because of the crime that's associated with it. Let's not act like that's not a problem. We know the heinous crimes that have happened on the Hickshari Trail. So I think we need to balance that. I know a lot of people that think like me aren't here tonight because they're, at home with their kids, trying to get them dinner, get to work the next day. So I just like to bring that viewpoint. And my time's up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Nezzy? Oh, wait, did you have he had a question? Oh, does this work anywhere?
Enforcement mechanisms for the proposed camps.
Thank you. And does it work anywhere?
So thank you for your question. That's why we raised, the issue. We did discuss the guidelines. Those guidelines would be established. As the public commenters mentioned, Betty's has worked. There was a lot of concerns, very similar to what the commenter was saying about those concerns never came to fruition. It's been extremely successful. I think that we can continue to do that with other operators as well. I will say that not all of these folks that are experiencing homelessness have drug addiction issues, and we are doing a lot as far as addressing the mental health issue. We're starting a whole new program related to that, and that would be a component of this as well. So it wouldn't be just put them in a place and leave them there. That's why the services would be provided to them at those locations.
Thank you. Nezzy.
Thank you. I would like to address the last commenter. I think there's a lot of concern all the way around, but I think this is an opportunity for us to do something different. There's no one size fits all. Everybody out there is unique. They're different. People make mistakes. We all do. We have to learn that there are options, other ways we can do things, and we should really be employing all that right now. I agree with Sequoia. I think it's really important that the city be proactive and really work at identifying sites that can be utilized, because there are a lot of people, a lot of organizations like ours, the one I'm affiliated with, AHA, that would like to do not maybe just one project or two, but be able to collaborate and work together with other organizations to expand our capacity to do more things for more people and for the city. I think the city needs to trust that it's going to be in the city's best interest. And it isn't going to be a free-for-all. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be working with us, with anybody who starts a project, to make connections for mental health services and to get people opportunities for the things that they need. I think it's unfortunate to limit the possibilities. And I know this is about encampments and about tiny home villages as possibilities, but also this is an opportunity for the city to foster collaboration. And there are lots of ways that we could do that. We could also, I want to ask if we can get copies of the maps of the things that we saw tonight and get access to those things. Also, if there's going to be assistance with grant writing, well, that's not me, thank you, with grant writing or acquiring funding And also, how many people are going to be allowed at the sites? Is there a finite number? Is that flexible? Is that dependent upon the site? Is that dependent upon the organization? That's not clear to me. And then in terms of buildings or other sites that might be possible, we do have a lot of buildings. I remember when Rob Homeland was here, he did a survey of all of the downtown quadrant for just empty buildings, second story and so forth, that possibly could be made into other kinds of dwellings or be activated, maybe providing some incentives for the landowners to provide them incentives or support in being able to offer those as something else. Maybe we could go back and look at some of those for SROs. And there's properties that I know the city identified earlier that aren't being utilized. We used to have 32 sites that were identified as SB2 zones. I don't know what happened to those. Some of those are the parking lots that are going to be developed. There were others that were vacant lots, car lots, empty lots. And as far as being able to suspend camping laws right now and being able to move people to some sites, I don't think it's going to be chaotic. I think that we can do that and deploy what we need to if we collaborate and do things as a community, which is what I would really hope to see us do. Also, in terms of low-income housing projects, we're going to continue to have low-income housing projects as long as the state is making monies available for that. But there's a gap between the street and getting into low-income housing projects, which are income eligible. And there just is nothing in between. So it really would behoove us to facilitate making some of these opportunities as quickly as we possibly can, and to work together, because nobody has it all. Nobody has all the money. Nobody has all the resources. We need to make those bridges. And there are a lot of people that are working for the city now that I'm really happy to see working for the city that know what this means for creating these kinds of alternatives. So I think the city should be proactive and start securing opportunities for people to have project and sites. And then let that be known, or let us help you do that with things that we're aware of. Maybe we could have a workshop session where it's collaborative and we can all contribute. In any case, we lost another person on the street last night, someone we know. And it's so disturbing that it's almost every day that this happens. And we just have to do this now. We can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you, Nezzy. City Manager Slattery.
Thank you, Nezzy.
Thank you.
So a lot of things to say. So the sites that were referenced that were looked at before, as was represented by Assistant Planner Smith, the entire inland zone is eligible for this type of project. So I don't think there's a lack of properties. From the city's perspective, identifying a site, like I said, is extremely difficult. The sites that we do own that are service commercial are no longer available. The coastal dependent industrial site that we have is not eligible for this. The other sites that we do have that are outside of the coastal zone that qualify for this are, like Nezzy said, some of the parking lots that are up for the RFPs for affordable housing. Could there be an interim solution there? Potentially. Those sites could potentially be used for an interim solution. However, they would be contingent on what we're doing with the RFP and what we're doing with the current link proposal. The only ones that are outside the coastal zone are our parking lot here at 6th and L, the 6th and M property that's currently under Link's purview, the 8th and G, and the Sunny and Myrtle are the sites that I know that we have parking lots that are outside the coastal zone, and those are the only ones that we do have. So as far as the properties, if people have property owners that are interested in doing this and they're interested in doing a lease with the city, we are all for it. We have gone to property owners. We're in discussions with property owners about potential shelter sites that we could use as a part of the Home Key grant, and we're doing research for that. But it's very difficult to find a private property owner that's interested in doing this. If anybody knows of one, please let us know, and staff will reach out to them.
Thank you. Looks like we have writing on the left, so let's go with Janelle. Welcome.
Thank you. Boy, it's been a while. New people. Well, nice to see you. Thank you for the work that has been done. Miles, I do have to say that regarding those sleeping sites, we need to have a chat. We need to have a chat. I did a public records request
to find out what the problems were at the sites, and I got 3 binders full, and they didn't comport with what was put in the press, out in the press. And also, remember, I called, and after talking with you, the problems with the dumpsters was taken care of, and that was a problem, but a simple phone call and it was resolved. So I think the sleeping sites are actually a good example. Shelter crisis. Are you aware that liability protection for government agency is part of the shelter crisis declaration? And for small organizations to carry that, that's another cost for them. And so the city, under a shelter crisis, you are protected from liability. So that's one of the reasons why I've been talking about our governmental agencies coming together and setting up a system of camps, and then put out RFPs just for the management. And that would include, doing the development and whatever, but that I'm asking our government to do it. Small nonprofits also have, sorry, I gotta go there. Are you willing to talk about county programs, is what it is, and especially a county-wide program, that the municipalities and the county work together. The city has done wonderful things. You were the first to pass this housing first. You were the first to do shelter crisis. You've led the way. I read recently about they were just now starting a police social worker team to go out. And you've been doing that for years. It was happening under Merle Harpham in 2011. The city had already hired. I'm going to run out of time. Are the slides available? City sites identified in the housing element, that was covered. Housing vacancy tax. Is this a source of, could this be a source of revenue for our shelter crisis projects? And there's something else, but I'll send it to staff. Thanks.
Thank you, Janelle. So, City Attorney Luna, will you be addressing this?
I just want to say both 2 people now have asked about access to the slides, and of course those are always available. So my office handles any Public Records Act requests, and the last commenter also did mention something about not getting what she was expecting from a Public Records Act request. So I want to encourage her to reach out to me if she has further questions about that. As far as liability goes, I think I want to address that just briefly. There are protections against negligence claims in the Shelter Crisis Act. That does not mean there is zero liability. So protections for negligence, that's great. However, the city still needs to ensure that it's complying with the law. And if it's not, there are certainly areas where liability could still attach. So broad statements about liability are met with some skepticism from your city attorney. And I think that's all I have to say about that, unless you guys noticed something else that I should address.
We will post all of these on our website, and we can put them on social media. We'll have project coordinator Hunter post all these presentations, both the counties as well as staffs, on our social media sites. And if anybody's interested, they can email me, and I can email them to you as well.
Thank you.
And I think the other question was, could a vacancy tax go towards possible supporting sanctioned camps? And I guess that would be part of the discussion council would have, and they could designate those revenues to where they see fit.
And we would need to establish a tax in the first place. But yes, that's...
And it wouldn't be called a tax.
Excuse me, not a tax, excuse me.
Yes.
A vacancy fine, I guess. Fee, excuse me. Once that's established, you guys can direct those funds to where you'd like them to go, if that's council's desire.
Okay, thank you. And on my left, are you ready? You're welcome.
I'd like to thank the City Council for hearing people's concerns. And into the microphone, please. I have a lot of detail with which I am doing triage, and I'd like to send the council members a more complete. My name is Doris Grin, and I have returned to Humboldt County after a long absence, living and working in the Sierra Nevada, primarily with Forest Service, but with other federal agencies. And I was exposed to the fire camp model, which is, and the disaster camp or the evacuation camp model for hundreds of people, which is a full service camp. It is got portable toilets and portable showers, portable laundry facilities, camps for, or, covered cafeterias and kitchens. They're able to feed people. They're able to help them with emotional stuff. There's sick bay areas. There's places for children. And there's actually, an assessment of people's skills. Can they help? Can they work? What they can do? The disaster of having your house burnt down is becoming all too common, and it is a contributor to homelessness. Turkey has shown us all that millions of people can become homeless in a matter of days. So in a way, we're all vulnerable to this. And so the fire camp model, I think, is a good plan for a homeless camp that can deal with hundreds of people and help them, feed them, get them warm, get them out of this hideous weather, and assess them for mental illness, and put them in another area where people can help them and provide more safety for other areas that don't have mental illness. I think the homeless situation is more of an economic disaster in this country, in this state, everywhere. And I think it would be best if we approached it as a disaster and worked out all the bugs on disaster camps so that if we ever need it for any kind of disaster, we know the format and we know what works and what doesn't work for large amounts of people. And I know there are hundreds and hundreds of homeless. These fire camps, disaster camps, they can be set up on raw land in a matter of a week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Were there any questions in that? I didn't hear any. Okay. Thank you. And on my right.
Hi there. I'm a street outreach worker. I'm also a representative of a group called HEAL, Humboldt Homeless Expertise and Leadership. And in the past week, our group has been gathering information for the county about how it's going for newly housed individuals. And so we have talked to people from various housing programs, including Uplift, and overwhelmingly, it's not going well. It's very hard for people to move directly into your traditional brick and mortar housing situation, especially when they're being cut off from their communities. So I really do hope that we see something like this happen, a tiny house village or sanctioned encampment where a community could actually be fostered. But as Manager Slattery said, things with the government do take, they're not quick. They're not quick. They're not inexpensive. But right now we have horrible weather. We lost apparently another person outdoors in Eureka this morning. And the longer we take to get people stabilized, the more lives that's going to cost. And so the thing that we can do immediately is just let people be stable, provide bathrooms and trash services so that things don't get so out of hand, so hard on the environment, and provide access to bathrooms, 24/7 access to bathrooms. Like, can you imagine not having a place to go in the middle of the night, you know? And our bathrooms are locked the vast majority of the time. So these are things that we can do immediately. I'm glad we're working toward these villages and encampments, but immediately. And please, like, cars are not great for shelter, but they're better than nothing. Please do something about all the cars that are being taken away from people every day. As we have snow and storms, people's cars are being taken away from them every day in Eureka. So do whatever you can to stop that.
Thank you.
Sorry, but I don't want to forget this. There was a question about some of the services for the cities to provide grant funding. We are more than happy to, and have done it to all of our other shelters, is assist with grant writing. We've been extremely successful. We actually have some funding currently that's going to be going towards the operation of Betty's location, and we would continue to do that for any other operator of a shelter as well.
Thank you. John. Welcome.
Good evening, City Councils, Mayor, City Manager. Thank you guys for getting to this point. I've been hearing it a lot, but you guys seem to be a little bit more serious now. I just beg you guys, Miles, also, don't give up on that rotating campground idea. You know, most of the time when I'm cleaning up homeless encampments and working with the homeless, the number one question is, where do you want me to go? I'm talking about triage. You guys have a normal setup, tiny villages, houses. They're all going to work if you put the right people in place. But what I'm talking about is getting the people immediately out of the areas that we really don't want them in, that's bad for them and bad for our community, into an area, at least temporarily, so we can actually provide services with. So there is another level. It's transition at the lowest level, ground zero, if you may. I just don't want you to lose sight of that. You guys are doing an amazing job. Miles is actually leading the way like I always knew he could. I've been doing this for way too many years now. I don't even know what happened to the 10-year plan to end homelessness that we worked on back when I first started social work. But I want to thank you guys for getting this far, and please invite me in and talk to me about what we can do at the first stages, the filtering system, the area where we're going to get people ready for Betty's and stuff like that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Okay. And on my right. Welcome.
Hello. Okay, my name is Jeffrey Harris. I'm not originally from Eureka. I'm from Sacramento, California. And apparently there are just 500 unhoused people here out of a population of 28,000, about 156, about 2%. And apparently this is an intractable problem to deal with this. Now, this is not just a local problem. This is becoming a national issue. And what is the same and what has changed? Okay, crime hasn't changed, mental illness hasn't changed. What's changed are two things. One, across the board, housing is becoming prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, the rents and the ownership costs. So like in Sacramento, 30 years ago, you could get an apartment for maybe $400. Now it's like a little over $1,000. And another thing is the tremendous growth in demand for hard drugs. This place is known as Eureka. It's very obvious. And also, I did a sketch on a map of incidents of homicides and theft and drug overdoses, and it was very much concentrated on the 101 corridor. The hot spot was Arcata Plaza. Another spot is B and Force, where they have the feeding area. And I knew something was up, and I asked around. I said, well, this was a dumping ground for prisoners from Pelican Bay. There was a mental group I went to, and it was by like McDonald's around Myrtle. It was concentrated around Myrtle and then around 101. So the thing is, what's this population? There's a lot of felons. There's a lot of people who are not right in their head, a lot of heavy-duty drug users, and then people who are simply improvident. And they have a level of impact disproportionate to the population. A factor of 10 relative to the common population. So the thing is, this is not just a special need population, this is a high impact population. And it's going to require a lot of structure and a lot of order and a lot of foresight. And it's bigger than what can be dealt with at the local or county level. It's going to require a state level response, even a national level response. It's going to have a lot of interagency planning and communication and order. Okay?
Thank you, Jeff. Joanne.
Hello, my name's Joanne McGarry, and I often bring props with me. And this is my go bag that I've developed to carry with me a lot of time for in case of a disaster. And we had one with the earthquake on December 20th, and I was able to grab it and some other things and run out. But what I wasn't able to do was find out where I was supposed to go if my house collapsed and where I was going to stay. And Doris, who just spoke about her fire camp experience, is something I've been thinking about as well. And why is the homeless issue not on the same level as fire victims or earthquake victims or whatever? And I remember the Humboldt Fairgrounds was set up beautifully by the American Red Cross, and other agencies came together and people were giving, happy donuts, and all sorts of supplies were being brought in, and blankets and all, good things. And I'm just trying to understand what's different about this disaster, and why can't we declare it a disaster and set up places for everybody to go to that they can stay at and be safe. And it just sort of boggles my mind that we don't look at it the same way we look at fire victims or earthquake victims. And I'm just, I've been thinking back to things like Katrina and stuff where, there were people that were jammed into a coliseum or, the baseball stadium or wherever it was in New Orleans. But I'm also thinking of things like Standing Rock and how organized and beautiful it was, and the different type of shelters and housing they developed in the South Dakota cold winters and things. So, we really can be creative and expansive and view this issue as a emergency disaster and have emergency disaster response. Engage the American Red Cross, engage CERT. I went to the emergency preparedness event yesterday from Humboldt Bay Fire. Got a lot of information and talked to a lot of people who they're trained and they're ready and they can be on call. We have to work through the Office of Emergency Services apparently, but we can engage these organizations and these volunteers to come together, and we can declare an emergency. And Redwood Acres is supposedly the place where people can go to get away from the tsunami. So why don't we think big and think important and value this issue of homelessness as much as we value any other disaster issue? It's on par with that, and we need to treat it like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Excuse me. Interestingly, that is how this started. We did declare a resolution of an emergency, as did many other communities. Unfortunately, FEMA and Cal OES do not treat those with excuse me, the same as the reimbursements that they do with natural disasters. But that is where we started. That's why that resolution was passed, was to declare emergency shelter declaration, and with the hopes that there would be federal and state funding coming from that, and it never came to fruition. So that is where we started with the whole shelter crisis.
Thank you. Let's go on this side. Welcome.
Evening, folks. I would like to advocate for a mixture of the Safe Park Safe shelters and more permanent structures. Homelessness isn't a problem that's going to be going away anytime soon, and in the meantime, there needs to be a permanent option for people facing homelessness. I would reckon that there's a lot of people in this room that are at least one month, one bad week away from being out there in the snow. And as long as that's the case, there needs to be places for people to go. I would advocate strongly for tiny home permanent structures to be placed, as many as can be placed in Eureka. There's 500 people in this city without homes, without places to go, constantly being shuffled around. And many of them struggle with substance abuse. Now, it's not a mystery why that's the case. It's a coping mechanism. When you're out there struggling to survive, struggling with exposure, it's natural to turn to whatever medication you can find to cope with that reality. Now, shelter and social services reduce that need. You can start helping people recover, and the first step is to give them just a place to sleep out of the cold. I apologize. I'm losing my train of thought. I would ask that what are people supposed to do while these structures are being built? Because there is an urgent, immediate need. The snow is outside. Like someone said earlier, the emergency was last week. It's today. And as of December, just that recently, the police were out there destroying homeless camps, sweeping people away. And that destroys people's support net. That disconnects people. People lose their things, what little things they have. They can lose their animals in that process. Where are people supposed to go? What are people supposed to do? When can we talk about stopping these sweeps until people actually have somewhere to go?
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. So, right now, we do have a lack of shelter space. A lot of the problems that we have when we do have available shelter space are the barriers. A lot of the barriers that I hear about are typically a pet or being a couple and those type of things. And that's what we're hoping to solve here, is to establish a location that has lower barriers and allows for more people to go there. When you reference sweeps, they're not sweeps. I believe the one that you were talking about in December was a private property owner wanting people off of their property. We do not ticket people for camping. We don't ticket people for being homeless. So it's not a matter of that. The one reference you're talking about was not city property. We do need to make space available that's public. When we do have people sleeping overnight, our ordinance does allow for people to sleep from dawn to dusk, and that is an allowable thing, and we allow that to happen. We're not perfect. I can say that we are a lot better than other communities. I can tell you that we've spent an inordinate amount of time trying to solve this problem. We're going to have expanded our capacity significantly over the last 5 years, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you. And how about over here on the left? Actually, Holly, there's somebody standing up, so you can go after her. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to try to get through this without crying.
Okay.
Those of you who have been with me on my journey to save my one daughter, 52 years old, 3 children. Her children are fine. I'm not. I've spent the better part of the last month on the mean streets of Eureka trying to find her. When I did find her, because she couldn't even follow the rules to stay in the Rescue Mission Family Shelter, she'd been thrown out of there too. Then she wound up at Semper Virens. Then she wound up in jail. It just goes on. And then I wound up at St. Joe. And I got the bill today. And my share is going to be over $2,000, which there's no way on God's green earth I can pay. So I'm back to square one for me also, if I keep paying my rent. Now, Michael Richardson has been doing this since before I knew about AHA. A wonderful man named Russ Shaddix was at one of the first convocations I went to in the kitchen at St. Vinny's, and he said, those of us who still have the ability to speak truth to power have the moral and ethical obligation to do so. I'm trying, but I have an apartment, and my rent will be automatically deducted tomorrow. So for another month, I won't be living in my car. But that means I have to walk away from that $2,000 bill I just got from St. Joe. I've got somebody working on the bill from last year from St. Joe. This is, it's a crisis, it's a catastrophe, and it's not getting any better. As the fella said, we need to do something last month or maybe even before Christmas. Time's a wasting.
Thank you, Holly. Okay. Want to come on up?
My name is Lori Thayer, and I moved here 21 years ago from New Orleans. And my first impression of Eureka was, wow, they're really proud of their jail. It's right in the heart of their city. Okay, fascinating. So from there, it's true that the unhoused population has increased. And a lot of the reason for that is Sacramento, San Francisco, and LA send parolees promising them that here they'll have housing, etc. Guess where they stay? My house. I go to the marsh every day with burritos, sandwiches. They're more afraid of me than I am of them. When I think of crime associated with drugs, I think of the Sackler family, the only people who've committed white collar crime to actually face prison time. And what good has it done? So when we talk about these things, let's think about every high-powered lawyer, politician, human resource manager, and head of a nonprofit, with the coke habit and other things. So my question is, when are we going to stop blaming the most vulnerable in this country and start blaming who really is responsible for it? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Well, I can assure you that city staff or our elected officials are not blaming our community members that are experiencing homelessness. We were one of the first to go after the suit for the opioid problems, and we're still pursuing that. But we definitely do not blame any community members for the position that they're in.
Thank you. Robin? Oh. Sure.
I just wanted to point out, if anyone out there has a medical bill that they can't pay, that the first step you should do is call the hospital and tell them that you can't pay it. I'm sure you're doing everything as possible, but just wanted to throw that out there in the conversation, that is one step for getting medical debt forgiven. Obviously, that is a big part of the whole conversation that we're having. But if anybody's unaware of that, that is a thing you can do.
Thank you, Councilmember Moulton. Ash. Welcome.
Hello there. As someone else was saying that, and it is a financial issue that is hitting our whole country. It's no mystery that we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine and all that, and not focusing on the stuff that's going on right in our backyards. But like as far as deregulating, and I think it might help a lot of the people that are almost homeless if we make these code and stuff exceptions just a blanket for the entire community. And this is I know this is just the city, but there's a lot of people like who are trying to look to buy their own their first house or stuff like that, or people who are they could get into a rental if their friend could put up some little mini barn in their backyard, but make it easier for people to do stuff like that, where they could just buy a lot, stick up something, and a lot of stuff like that to make things easier. I'd not have to install ridiculous sprinkler systems on new houses that they are building. Just on all these failures in state policy that could be addressed under this too, because I know it's the main thing we're addressing is the homeless issue, but there's lots of people that are just that close to joining that crowd. So, I just asked, is there any way that some of that could be worked in to what's doing here? Just make it a blanket thing to where it's not discriminatory to, people who aren't there yet. And that's it.
Thank you, Ash. Jeez. So a lot of the housing assistance funds that we get come from the state and federal government. They are starting programs currently now that are for preventative measures, and we will be applying for those grants. I believe our next HAP grant will have some preventative measures to address the issues that you're talking about. And so if we have the same success we've had with the housing assistance funds, which would be the same thing, we would be able to use that money for preventative. Currently, right now, the funding that we do have for housing assistance only allows for addressing community members experiencing homelessness. But hopefully more measures like this come forward so that funding becomes available for municipalities like us.
Mainly just talking about deregulation.
From a city's muni code, yes, it could.
I just want to put in a plug for anybody wanting to build anything in their backyard. Our planners know everything about that it has gotten easier to do the kind of small buildings in a backyard than it was in the past. And I hope the planners don't mind me just making a plug for calling them. If anybody is interested, they will encourage you.
Thank you for that. Robin?
It's been a while since I've been here. Before COVID, probably 2016, we were trying to get the shelter crisis ordinance, whatever it's called, passed. Good question was asked, why is this not treated as an emergency the way that earthquake or fire is? The federal government, FDR, started HUD, Housing Urban Development, put a lot of money into affordable housing, and money in that budget increased every year, I believe, until Ronald Reagan became the president, and then they started cutting it, and they cut it, and they cut it. So at the local level, we're faced with the decades and decades long negligence of the needs of working people in regards to affordable housing. Anecdotally, when Occupy was happening, there was a movement to seize back the courthouse from the Occupy people, and Mike Newman, I believe that's his name, he was a city council member. Somebody might know that. He was down there, and I thought I'd talk to him. I didn't know who he was. I just said I'd talk to one of the people on the other side. What's going on? And he said, well, it's these homeless people, these houseless people, and they're drugging, and they're fighting, and they're cursing. So I told him my father was a very successful businessman in his career. He was a domestic violence perpetrator, and he was an alcoholic. I said, there's a lot of people in housed situations who are drug addicts, living horrible lives. And Mike Newman said, yes, but they're doing it inside the house. So the morality of doing it on the street or doing it in the house seems to be private property. And the idea that the sweeps were not sweeps because there was a private property person, it sounds like it was a private property sweep, putting private property over human needs. And the drug issue, well, Mayor, you know well that Hatcher was here and they got hounded out of town. You played a role in that. And you admitted they did a good job, but the hounds, I hate to castigate dogs, but the people who were against having any kind of needle exchange program, you supported them. And now Hatcher is not in the city of Eureka. Why does the city needs to be brave and not be restricted by the rules laid down by the state. If the state isn't saying that you can do certain things, you need to say, on the ground, we have a problem and we're going to do it. And let the state sue you. Let the state say you can't do it. And if you can't stand up to the state, then
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Deb?
I believe you had a question at the beginning.
Oh, excuse me. One moment, Deb. Miles?
Oh, so yes, the natural disaster. So like I said, this was declared a disaster with the intent of it be recouping money. I will say that there has been a lot of funding becoming available. It's not in the same vein as FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, or Cal OES, which is our local state. But we received $1.6 million in grant funding from the Emergency Encampment Resolution, and so that was funding that was made available by Governor Newsom, and that is going towards the Crowley property to build those modular units and for operational expenses. I'm sure there'll be more funding coming up. The Home Key grants, another one that has been significantly, they've added a lot more money to that and it's made it available to us. So while it's not the same type of reimbursement mechanism as typical emergencies, they've definitely allowed competitive grant funding to be made available. But I say from a staff perspective, it would be nice if this was treated similar to a fire and allow for us to ask for mutual aid to have shelters set up. That would be great, but staff nor our elected officials have control over that.
Thank you. Deb, come on up.
Good evening. I would like to thank everybody for having this time here, but I'd like to give my 3 minutes to the people that are dying, that have died, and are going to die while we sit around and wait.
Thank you, Deb.
Hello?
So we're taking a moment of silence. Dottie, I see your hand up there, but we're going to take a minute. Thank you, Deb. Is there anyone from the audience that would like to speak? Anyone else? Come on up, please.
Hi. My name's Lisa Gust. I work with the county. I do outreach with the homeless. I've worked here for 6 years. 6 years ago, they were talking about building something, a day center, something, anything to help the homeless. 6 years has gone by and not one thing has changed. What's our next step? I want to know what's going to happen when we leave this meeting. What is going to happen? Because I have seen nothing happening. People are dying. People are out there in the freezing cold. There's no place for them to go. If they have animals, they're just SOL. If they're on drugs, they're just SOL. You know, like nobody will take them. If they're too mentally ill, nobody will take them. There's no place for them to go. The gentleman who died at the bus station last night was one of those that there was no place for him to go. He was destined to be on the streets for the rest of his life. There was no help for him. We tried to help him, but it didn't work. So guess what? He was destined to be homeless for the rest of his life. And now he's dead. What is the next step? I want to know what's going to happen after this meeting. Something has to happen now. We cannot wait anymore. What happened to America being grassroots? Why don't we just say, you know, why are we so worried about the government? Why do we have to follow everything? Why? This is America. Why aren't we doing more to help our own people? We're helping other countries more than we're helping our own people. What happened to Americans' spirit where we supported our own people, helped our own people, didn't listen to all the stupid government regulations that are prohibiting us from helping people? We need to just start our own movement and just start working to help people now, tonight, tomorrow. Why can't we just pick a spot in a field and put a homeless camp up and help people now? Why not? Why can't we? What's going to stop us? We're going to get fined? What? What's going to happen? Why can't we do something now?
Thank you, Lisa. City Manager Slattery.
So as a government agency, we are beholden to rules and regulations, not only ours, but also the state and the federal government. So while that's the case, I think that we've been extremely creative in getting around those things. Over the last 6 years, we've created well over 150 beds in the city of Eureka alone, and we have more pending. We do have a navigation center going into place in partnership with the county. It just got approved for construction at their last meeting. They're potholing for utilities right now, and that is going to begin construction very soon. But as far as just disregarding all the rules of the land, I think that that wouldn't be in the best interest of the city of Eureka.
Thank you. This gal on this side. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Ellen Taylor. I don't live in Eureka. I live in Petrolia, but I practiced in Eureka at Open Door Clinic as a physician assistant for 31 years. And during most of those 31 years, I was in very close contact with people who lived on the streets. And it was the palpability of hostility to homeless people was immediately apparent with regulation which put railings in the middle of benches on which people could sleep. And after that, it just got worse. So many of my patients couldn't find bathrooms. We found them in the garden outside early in the morning apologizing. And it became apparent to me that very many of the mental health problems and the substance abuse problems were completely related to homelessness and the complete lack of stability. And I think if any of us experience that, and maybe some of us have in our in our youth, but when we're young and strong, it's not so important. But as you get older, these issues become much more difficult to deal with, being chased around town by police that are trying to keep you from parking and sleeping. Just the lack of sleep can drive anybody crazy. I see that what you're doing here is, you seem to be caught in a mess of an entanglement of regulations and how to get money, and it's a sort of trap. And I've seen that all along, really. I was a little bit involved with the Yeehaw community up. It's out of your range, but it's up north of Trinidad. A very basically peaceful community, completely self-organized, self-built, and safe. It's a safe community. They probably have more incidents of violence and things like that, but it's basically self-regulated. But the county has tried to wipe it out. I agree with the woman who spoke last. The idea of simply finding the freedom, and imagination can do wonders to find a place where you can actually do that. Find a big field and get associations between local carpenters and homeless people who can build a little house for themselves together with a little bit of space in between. And it's a transition indeed between living outdoors, which is, there's something to be admired about living outdoors, very small carbon footprint, and going into a little slot in a high rise. If you're imaginative and humorful, you can do something like that. And if a person is allowed to feel like they've got their feet on the ground in a little house somewhere, you can expect miracles in terms of their mental health. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Rick Ellis. We've been talking about tiny house villages and safe shelters and all this stuff, and that's not doing us a damn bit of good about what's going on right now. We do have a situation where the weather is really extreme right now, and we do have parks in both the city and the county where they're not allowed to put up tents or stay in the parks. That is room that they could utilize right now to get them out of this extreme weather situation. Why can't we provide them with tents and sleeping bags and start putting them in these parks around our community? They need help now, not tomorrow.
Thank you. Rick?
So this goes along with the line of alleviating our no camping ordinance. Like I said, that is something that council could consider. There would be significant concerns about staff, about how that would be managed. As far as supplying all of the equipment, there would be a funding issue for that. But if we don't supply the equipment, putting them into a park isn't going to alleviate them from having these conflicts with the weather. But that's a way that could happen if we just got rid of our no camping ordinance and just let it fly, and it would be a significant impact on staff, I can assure you that.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else from the audience that would like to comment? Come on up. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome.
My name is Pam Myers, and I just have one question. Are those who are homeless, are they giving input to us, to the committees, to the ordinances, to all of those things? Because I hope that they are. I think then they will be empowered. We can sit here and talk and care. I really do, and we all do. But I think we need to hear from them so that they will feel that they're being heard as well. And is that happening? If it is, that's why I'm asking. What are we doing to get their input to proceed?
So, like I said, we have homeless outreach workers that are at free meal every single day from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. And that's a mechanism for us to get input. We have had community members experiencing homeless here speak at our public comment multiple times, especially when we were dealing with the issues at Palco Marsh. But yeah, from standpoint of getting input, that's definitely done through our Uplift program and our CSET program and the discussions where we go out and meet people where they're at, provide them services, and get their input about what their needs are.
Thank you. Come on up.
Hi. My name is Shamika Keel, and I've been an outreach worker in this community for the last 6 years. And honestly, I don't want my questions answered this evening. I just want to give insight and just language really matters. And I was born and raised here in Eureka, California. And I've watched Eureka grow with me. I've grown up with Eureka and Humboldt County. And as an outreach worker over the last 6 years, I've worked with your family members. I've worked with your homelessness. The people that are out there, it's not a monolith, okay? It's not just mentally ill people. It's not just your substance abuse addicted people. It's also elderly people who are disabled and cannot access resources. And this is a major public health crisis across the board, across the nation. And it should be looked at as an emergency at all times. And it should be looked at as a collaborative response at the highest level at this point, because it is, with COVID-19, continuous natural disasters, this is only becoming a more drastic and more urgent issue that is constantly affecting us all. People are literally dying like in front of our face right now. An outreach worker friend literally just revived a man who was overdosing.
Excuse me.
He overdosed, and she had to Narcan him 3 times, and I watched this chick cry to me. And I even had a conversation with this man like 3 days after it happened. And our outreach workers are burnt the fuck out, excuse my language, but literally we're taking stress leave. I've even seen outreach workers go back to homelessness because we're not getting paid enough to support ourselves, our families. And so I just want everybody here, all of you in front of me, all of you behind me, all of you watching at home, this is your community. This is not just a homeless issue. This is all of our issue. This is our people. This is us. This is us. This is us right now, and we're dying. So please, let's all come together as a community. Every single one of us come together and do something about it. That's all I want to say. Please don't answer any more questions. Just think about it. Just marinate on it. Thank you. I appreciate you all.
Thank you, Shamika. Okay, last call for people in the audience. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this item? Come on up now.
Hello. I don't have too much of a response in mind of what I want to hear from you guys, but I'd just like to let you know and show you another face of someone who's waiting on change, someone who's been waiting for a really long time. I'm houseless as well. And every day that we're waiting for you guys to keep processing and erase hurdles for us, we're waking up cold. We're living on canned food. We don't have a way to cook. We don't have access to bathrooms. We see the no loitering signs. We feel like burdens on society sometimes. And sometimes when we come to these kinds of things, we see you guys talk and we see you respond and we see you say, we're working on it. We're doing so good. We have 150 beds in the last couple of years. Well, I think that there are a lot more people who need help and a lot faster, because this problem is growing really rapidly. And there are a lot of people my age. I'm only 20 years old. We're students and we're trying to have a job so we can someday dream of affording to retire or have a home or not live in our cars or maybe someday do the things that make us feel passionate. These kinds of things are hard to imagine when you don't even have your basic needs met. Excuse me. I'd just like to let you know that these are everyday people and we're really struggling. They say that the more desperate you are, the harder you fight. But a lot of the time when you're living in situations like this, it makes you tired. So there are very few of us that are still able to have the strength to come up and say something. And I just want you to consider all the people who have been strong for a long time and fought for a long time. And when they saw that nothing changed fast enough to save them or to save their family members, Sometimes it's harder to fight after that. But I'd like you to know that there are a lot of people out there who are still fighting in the right direction, and I hope that you are among those people. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. No. You already had your 3 minutes, Janelle.
No, actually, I left. I got flustered, and I left, and there was still some time on. And I will take 15
So I don't
seconds.
think this is appropriate. You can
Okay.
certainly send your questions
I will
through
send
email.
them to you if you can.
Okay, that's great.
Now I've taken 10 seconds.
Appreciate
bothering
that.
you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience? Okay. Seeing none, we'll...
Althea?
Thank you. Go to Zoom.
Okay, yeah, I've been waiting very patiently on Zoom. The only real question I have is, it kind of sounded like with private property owners hearing about the home key program, that they would hear about that program and then kind of raise their price. Is that what was happening? Like a kind of a price gouging once they realized they could, milk the government for all it was worth. And then for comment, there's people who say, oh, well, if they want to compare sanctioned camps to the South Jetty, which was not sanctioned, to the Palco March, which was not sanctioned, and, oh, those were terrible places. And they act like we haven't had sanctioned homeless housing here. I'm glad John Shelter came, because his example when he was managing the Jacobs Junior High property was actually a really good example of something like this working, where he had his guys who were staying inside the Jacobs building and taking part in the upkeep. They were doing the maintenance, they were doing the lawn, they were keeping other people out of there. And as far as I know, that worked fantastically well. So this is something that works in other places, and this is something that has worked well here, and the other thing is, there's 1,500 homeless people in the county of Humboldt right now. And even if every single one of them tonight decided to get clean and sober and pull themselves up by their bootstraps and, get a hardworking job and work, 12 hours a day starting tomorrow, there still wouldn't be enough housing for them. There's maybe, I doubt there's even 100 apartments available throughout the entire county right now. The housing is just not there for the people. We need more of it, whether that's transitional housing or, apartment buildings. And I really hate to see people disparage an apartment as a little slot in a high rise when that's housing. There's nothing wrong with living in a high rise. There's nothing wrong with living in an apartment. Single family homes are kind of a waste of space. They're not the most efficient.
Thank you, Althea.
So to answer the question about the home key, basically what happened is that got around to property owners that the grant afforded $150,000 per door, and people assumed that to mean that was to purchase the property. And so when they assumed that, they were very far off. And so the first round of home key, a lot of people were expecting much higher prices, and come to find out that it has to be a certified appraisal of the property, and it's based on the actual price of the property. And so that's why we heard from a lot of hotel owners as well as vacant property owners at that time expecting to see a much larger windfall.
Thank you. Do you see anybody else on Zoom that wanted to comment?
Is there anyone else on Zoom that would like to comment? If so, raise your hand.
I'm trying to raise my hand.
It's okay, Dottie. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So I just want to know,
How did this happen? How did it happen that my nephew, who never hurt anybody, was alone and cold and died on a bus stop in Old Town? How did this happen? That Adult Protective Services had been called? How did it happen that Health and Human Services had been called? How did it happen that RCAA was trying to reach out? How did it happen that a person knew that he was sick and he needed help? How did this happen? How many things has to happen to somebody? How do we change this? In 2005, we all rah in the supervisor's chamber to ending homelessness in 10 years in 2005. I thought that was too long. I didn't know why we didn't just end homelessness right away. But, I understand that it's really a great idea to put somebody in a really nice apartment or a really nice house, but I know full well through our church, in one day when there wasn't an emergency shelter in 2019, in one day, we took a building and we had 26 people sleeping overnight on the property, completely unfunded by the county. It can be done. My nephew passed away in Old Town. Why? Because he was told that the services were better and he should go to where the services are in Eureka. You guys are wonderful, and I know you really care, and I know you really want to do the right thing, but he just followed the information he was given. He just followed what he was asked to do. The same thing happened with the lady that was living in a trailer in the trailer park in Phillipsville, and she was given a voucher because she was going to get a nicer place to live. So she moved from a rather funky trailer into the voucher program at the motel. Then she was moved to Eureka where the services were better, and she died there. I mean, let's collaborate with Southern Humboldt. Let's pull this together. There's some land there. There's some resources there. Let's put this together. You have a lot of great things that you can do. We have a lot of great things that we can offer too. Let's don't send the people from Southern Humboldt up to Eureka to die. How did this happen? How did this happen that he was on a bus bench? How did it happen that it was cold? How did it happen that he was there long enough that he had a pile of cigarette butts there? How did it happen that nobody saw him and nobody cared? How did this happen? Please contact me. Please do something so that we don't have to watch this happen to families and people that are young, that have years and years to go, dying on bus benches. Please contact me. Will somebody up there contact me and see what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong? We're members of a church. The church can get a piece of property for you to lease and have people stay there developing.
Thank you, Dottie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you see anyone else on Zoom?
Maribeth?
Hi, thank you for giving me my 3 minutes, even though I didn't make it down to the chambers there. A couple of things. I realize that the wiping out the camping ordinance seems an impossible thing to do, right? Like what a mess that would make. But I think it's really important to remember it's happening, right? Like when there's a human being and they're living in a tent somewhere and you take the tent down and tell them they have to move, they gotta go somewhere. So it's not like it isn't already happening, right? So, there's something I tell my 20-year-old son all the time is you have to start saying that it's possible to solve. A problem is possible to solve before you can think of a solution that maybe we haven't come up with yet, right? Like, obviously, we haven't fixed this yet. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, that it's happening. People are already needing to camp, and they already need to use the bathroom. Like, that's a thing. And then the other thing, I would be really interested in some transparency, I guess, with existing funds. And, you know, these solutions are great, right? Like, there's this property and tiny villages, and I know that there are nonprofits in the county that have plans already for tiny villages. So where's the barrier, right? Like, why is it the next step just seems so hard to take? So I guess that's really my question for you guys, is what's the next step to make this happen?
So, thank you for the question. As we discussed earlier, the next step is to work on an agreement with anybody who's interested in working on an agreement. We've done this, like I said, multiple times with multiple groups. Some have been successful, some have not been successful. So if there's anybody interested out there in doing a project, we'd be able to talk to you tomorrow. I'll even talk to you tonight about it. We'd be more than interested in understanding what your ideas are and how we can incorporate them into our guidelines and make it happen. Like I said, we've done it multiple times, and we'd be more than happy to do it again. We have the provisions in place. I think we've been extremely proactive in this area, and I think that while frustrating for a lot of people, we're in a position now to be able to do things like other communities couldn't do, because we've done things as far as emergency shelter ordinance, our uplift program, our mental health program. All of those things could help support a sanctioned camp or tiny home village. And there's people in the audience that I've talked to about this multiple times and tried to come to a solution. Be more than willing to do that again. I think we've come very close. And if there is a property in place, I'm sure our elected officials would be more than happy to sign a lease with somebody. We'd be more than happy to look at the properties that we have. But like I said, those properties are extremely limited. People ask, have we gone to the Coastal Commission and determined whether or not we could put a campground there? That's the whole reason why we went through a 2-year-long process to rezone a property so that it could be a campground. That's the time frame we're looking at if we're trying to deal with that. If there's a principally permitted property in the coastal zone that's principally permitted for campgrounds, we could do that. We don't own that, and we're looking into that from private properties standpoint. But we don't own a property that is principally permitted for campgrounds or the other zoning designations that are allowable in the coastal zone.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, Shannon, on Zoom?
I do not see any.
Okay, seeing no one, we'll bring it back to council. Would you entertain the idea of a bio break? How about we come back at 8:05? I want to thank you all for being questions, and we're going to start with Council Member Contreras Deloach.
Thank you. So I have kind of a combination of questions, actually, since I'm relatively new, since I'm very new, and then also comments. So, and then I apologize. I'm still getting over whatever I'd had, and so I'm kind of raspy and need to take drinks. So I apologize for that in advance. I don't know. Can you hear me better now? Is it just that I needed to get closer? Okay, but you can hear me now. Okay, perfect. So a couple of things. One is I heard you refer to a couple of times the obstacle in 2020. So I'd kind of like to know some of what did we encounter in 2020? How do we avoid this in 2023? The other thing is, I'm just sitting here, I'm thinking, I think this is how everybody feels, and I appreciate everybody that came and spoke. But something creative. I just put something in front of us so we can say yes and vote on it, and get this moving. I'm wondering why only city-owned property. We're talking about that we could do these large leases or whatever, but I was looking into this and I'm trying to remember, I think it was in the Cal Cities thing that we get. There's a couple of cities that have loosened or changed, and as part of their emergency situation, what they've done is they've said, we're going to allow RVs and stuff like that to be parked on properties themselves, on individual owners' properties. And so I know, I'm not going to say where, but we have a number of those throughout the area that I live in. They're clean, they're well maintained. I don't really see any reason why that isn't something that can be done. It's definitely less cost prohibitive than ADUs, which are very cost prohibitive still, and also require a number of different things. So I know that people have to have electricity and sewer and stuff like that run to it in order for them to do this. But I'd like to at least talk about it because this is something that is being done in some other cities. I don't know if this has already been discussed, if there's a reason why we can't, but I just feel like that might be a way to overcome that hurdle of an expensive ADU while also addressing, this ability, instead of looking for one or two large properties that allow us to park a lot of things, maybe allowing people to coordinate and work with people, as clearly some people have done, and put these on their property. So that's something else. I don't even know if I want to spend time on this, on how a tent becomes ADA accessible. I don't even know if I want to waste time on that right now. We can talk about that another time. But I'm also wondering if there isn't some way we could issue some kind of little permit or something that just lets us know, somebody can keep something in their dash or on their, this is being used as my shelter, so that it doesn't get hauled off. We get a lot of abandoned and dumped vehicles in my neighborhood. And they are legitimately, I think, dumped and abandoned because they'll sit there for days with no one anywhere near. But I think if somebody is using something like that as a shelter, I really wouldn't want to see things being, I don't want us to be impounding vehicles if someone is not necessarily using that as a vehicle, but that is a shelter. And yeah, so I think those are the main ones. And then I was curious about some of these larger parking lot things, like that one derelict abandoned part of the Bayshore Mall parking lot that's off in the corner as potential parking things. I think that's all of mine.
Okay.
Thanks.
There's a lot of questions, and I'm probably going to have to ask you to ask them a couple of them again. I'll start from the back forward. The Bayshore Mall parking lot, the north end of that, is owned by us, but leased by the Bayshore Mall. We have spoken with them in the past about utilizing that property. Some of those parking spaces on the far north end that face the marsh area are still under the ownership of the city and required by a permit for us to maintain for access to that marsh. It was part of the mitigation for that. The other location that is more towards Sears, that is owned by the Bayshore Mall, and we would need their permission. We've asked them in the past, and we've been refused to allow to do anything there. We've even asked to use that as what did we use it? I can't remember what it was. Oh, for a site for Hatcher when we were there, and that was the last time we reached out to them, was as a site for Hatcher, and they weren't doing that. We could reach out to them again and ask them again, but it would be up to their discretion as to whether or not we could use that. The questions about mobile homes. So as far as what we do when we do vehicle abatements, we don't do vehicle abatements just because they're sleeping there. We do vehicle abatements if they're unregistered and they're on the road for more than 70. We have to notify them. They have to be on the road for 72 hours, and then they get abated. Sometimes it's because lack of registration, which is a vehicle code that needs to be complied by, and sometimes it is because they don't have proof of ownership. We don't go and abate their vehicles because they're sleeping in it. As far as a permit system where you could say, yes, you can stay here, if they meet all the other vehicle codes, that is something that we could do. The question would be, the 72-hour thing would probably come into play, and that's something that we have as a code, yes?
Can I ask as a follow-up? So the registration stuff, that is a state thing, correct?
Yeah, you can't have a
So-
vehicle on the road that's not registered.
Yeah, I understand that. And I know there's a lot of them because of how expensive it is to register vehicles, especially if they get behind here in California. It becomes kind of a downward spiral. So I was just wondering, separate from state enforcement issues, if someone is using that as a shelter, is there some way that we as a city can say this is being used as a shelter and that we are not going to do anything about that?
I think on a public street, we are not allowed to supplant state law when it comes to that. On a separate site, maybe. I would have to look into that. And I also would say, and maybe this is a question for any one of our officers who is still here, but a lot of this abatement goes on as a result of phone calls that we're getting from members of the public who don't want vehicles illegally parked in front of their house. So there's some tension there that I think needs to be acknowledged. And if I'm incorrect about this mostly being a response to calls for service, I hope one of the officers will come and correct me, but I don't think we're out there roving around looking for violations.
I can assure you, and a lot of those vehicles that are abated are not necessarily those that are being used for shelter. A good portion of them are not being those that are used for shelter. Now, if we wanted to look at this, that's one of the provisions that Chief Building Official Riley spoke about. There is a provision in the building code that allows for mobile structures. There was the membrane structures, the tiny home, and then the mobile ones. Some of these potentially could fall under that, and that would need to comply with those state regulations as far as those whatever the compliance issue is, the heights and those type of things. As far as private property, like I said, we can totally do private property. We just need to lease it from them so that we can have these variances for zoning and for the building code. And so if somebody is interested, and it's let's say a church group has a parking lot and they want to use this as a safe parking, we could totally do that. We need to make sure from the building code's perspective that we have communal sanitation facilities, communal kitchen facilities, and as long as we had that in place, that could happen. The cost of that we would need to figure out, and that's something that we could do via a grant or some nonprofit if they're interested in doing that. As far as the tent and it being ADA, it's just like another structure, so you need to make sure that the ground is level, you need to make sure that the bed's a certain height, you need to make sure that any of those things that are in their chairs, those type of things, meet those ADA requirements.
To be clear, I wasn't asking about a large property that we would lease as a city. I was asking if there was a way that we could, as individual owners, or that people on kind of more of a, instead of trying to address it on such a large scale, if there was a way for us to loosen up our current restrictions that do not allow people to park RVs on their property, to allow them to do that.
Yes. And I think I don't even think we have a regulation for, if it's on your private property, I think you could do that now, right? Correct?
Yeah. We have
I thought it had
Principal
to
Planner
be...
Getz is nodding her head in the back
Yes.
of the room.
It is?
So.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I thought it had to be built, it could be on wheels, but it still needed to be built to tiny home standards and could not be an RV. So I'm wrong?
Yeah, you could do that on
Okay.
your own private property.
Okay,
Couldn't
thank
be
you.
on our public street, though.
Thanks.
And I know you had at least 2 more questions.
I know, I'm sorry. I have no idea I have this list here. I know, I think you actually went over them. Oh, what happened in 2020?
Oh, that's right.
And how do we
it was
not
actually
get tripped up
Councilmember Castellano, myself, community member, and AHA met for approximately 4 months under the same guise as what we spoke about tonight, trying to come up with a framework that would be presentable to council. We had many, many meetings with board members, with our previous police chief, with myself, Sergeant LaFrance at the time, and community members. Came to a consensus, from my understanding, that we were ready to move forward and go to council, and then it was decided by AHA not to move forward with that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Castellano.
And I just want to say real quick to that, it's, the relationship building can take time sometimes. And, but I don't think that the conversation is necessarily like over or ended or anything like that. But then also just real quick, I feel like, with our participatory budgeting, we budgeted in monies to prevent people who might not be able to pay their rent and things. I'm wondering if someone lives in Eureka, not passing through, and they don't have a home, and they're living in their car, if we could use that money to pay their registration fees.
I don't see a problem with that. If that's what's, it would be limited to the amounts that was approved by council. But yeah, so the rental assistance is up to $500. I think that we could, you have to go, do you see a problem with that?
I would have to take a look at what the actual decision was and whether or not we put guidelines in place that would restrict that. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's certainly something we should look into.
And we'll look into that and then bring it back to you guys. I'll bring it up in our city manager report next week, as long as City Attorney Luna reminds me.
Go ahead.
Sure. I just didn't want to forget that, so now I have to go back and, okay, no problem. Sorry, this is not, okay, well, I'm just going to say, I don't know if I have questions right now, I just have ideas, but I probably do have questions, but I really agree with people's sense of expediency and moving this forward and creativity. I feel like we need more than one solution, honestly, because, as people spoke to tonight, there are, different things will work for different people. There's a wide variety of people who are unhoused. And so what I'm imagining, or what I was thinking after hearing people, is to create a pathway to success where we actually say, okay, if the first step is making a plan, we're going to host some workshops, with anyone who's interested to collaborate on making not just one plan, but, maybe 5 plans that could be successful, and, and just kind of generating those. And then, okay, too, if site is the next step, we're going to host a collaborative workshop and find sites and support the finding of sites, and I would like to see the city, at that point designate at least one site, as a way of, in good faith, and especially at that point, there have been some work on some plans, designating a site, and hopefully also working with the county and other, municipalities to, it would be great if this was a region-wide effort and there was sort of a movement around that. And then, and then I think the third part, and maybe, would be working with people and, to get grants. And so basically saying, okay, we're going to host a series of workshops and say, we're going to find success. Not that we hope it works out, we hope you make a good plan and, whatever, we hope you get funding, but we're going to, at the end of this process, there's going to be at least one, but ideally 3 viable solutions. I feel like that's what I was thinking after hearing everyone.
So just to follow up on some of that, so the county is allowable. The one thing that is beneficial to our program is the county, when they do private property, they don't lease it, and so the building code restrictions on private property in the county are pretty restrictive. They do help in terms of ADA accessibility, but a lot of the other provisions are a lot more cost prohibitive. But if that's what council desires, we'd be more than happy as staff to host workshops or even individual work groups with folks and trying to brainstorm these things. We've done it in the past, and like I said, I've had meetings with the WIAT recently, and I've had meetings with with Salvation Army. Both entities are interested in doing something like this, and we're continuing to pursue that, and that's happened over the last 5 months.
And I feel like there needs to be, a time signature, just okay, and I understand for sure that this is an emergency that's happening now, and I want to, just honor that. The longer we wait, the more people potentially are in life-threatening, or the more people are in life-threatening situations. Is not potentially, as is certainly indicated by our community right now, and also this is just kind of an aside, but I think that there's some space to explore around single room occupancies, that we could even open up some more space around that with code. I know that there's been some forward movement, but I think that there's some possibilities there.
Okay. I will say, one of the home key coming up, we are working very hard as staff looking at that as a huge opportunity to do exactly what we're talking about, and not only address the financial costs with making them compliant, but also operational costs. And so we're hoping that a couple of private property owners are willing to work with us, and if they are, it would be really beneficial for this purpose. Unfortunately, it won't happen overnight, but once the money is there, it's not a long process.
And then I don't necessarily need to know that, but I'm like, how long does the mall have the lease on the parking lot?
It's a very, very long time.
Okay. Sorry. And then just to say, I know we have a number of sites, parking lot sites set for housing. And as we know, with the link process, that can take many years sometimes, and so I think it would also be worthwhile in saying, like, in the 10 years it's going to take or longer to develop these sites, that, of saying one of our parking lot sites would be a site for housing or for,
It's pretty much what we're limited to right now. Like I discussed previously, we don't, I need to double check with planning because those are zoned downtown, I believe, but, oh no, they're in inland, so we don't got to worry about that. So those would be, would definitely be an option.
Thank you. Councilmember Fernandez.
Thank you. I've got a few statements followed by litany of questions here, so I know you're ready for that.
Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate everybody's empathy and participation in tonight. This could have gone a whole different direction, and I'm appreciative of folks understanding the difficulty for unhoused folks, and just the comments that were made tonight too. So I understand at least what's been presented to us by the folks that have spoken is that the situation is emergent. This is something that's been going on for years, and there's a 10-year plan that goes back to 2005 apparently that I was completely unaware of, and here we are in 2023. So what do we have for the interim? Because there are a lot of projects that are coming up and looking at completion in years to come, but what do we have right now? And I do appreciate folks bringing up that we need to and should look at this as a disaster. And I understand from the city manager that we can't expect the reimbursement that we would get from the state or the feds if we say this is a natural disaster, which in a lot of ways it is. We have an unhoused population of more than a few hundred people. So if we can look at it and approach it from the perspective of it being a disaster, how can we scale it down from there? And so we'll start with that first question. What do we have for the interim? How many homeless approximately do we have in Eureka? Because there were a few numbers tossed around tonight.
Oh, well, so that's always a moving target. The point in time count is done, I believe, every 2 years. It's done by volunteers. Obviously, having volunteers do this work provides a risk factor that a lot of entities are trying to avoid. And so there was a method of doing the point in time count that was adopted by Sonoma that most of the agencies across California are adopting now. And so they're not specific interviews with unsheltered folks. It's basically some of them are where they feel safe, but typically it's go by, you see an encampment, and there's a certain number associated with that. And so that's the way it's done. It's not an exact science. Their number right now, I believe, is 400 and something of unsheltered community members within the city of Eureka. And that's, I believe, also includes couch hopping. There's different definitions of what's considered homeless. Our EPD have been out there, free meal, the encampments they go to, those type of things. They've done their own survey. I believe it was 4 years ago, and hopefully Lenny. Hey, Lenny, can you come up and give those numbers? Commander LaFrance, I'm sorry. Jeez, of all people. My apologies.
So yeah, we did our survey in 2022 between March and April. We use the same sample every 2 years. And so this last round, it was 259 individual surveys. In 2020, it was 205.
Okay. So yeah, it's somewhere in that ballpark. What we've done, I mean, I hate to see beating a dead horse. We've done, we've expanded the capacity at Eureka Rescue Mission over the last 4 years with assistance from the city to almost double. We just recently practically doubled the women and children's side. We added, I believe it's 22 beds for the family shelter for Betty across the street from the day center. We have, we have the pending projects. We have the 40 or so, or 30 to 40 beds that are going to come as a part of the Crowley project. The WIAT have more housing, more so for kind of transitional housing for the HUD, the home key grant that they got, and I believe that's 70 beds that are going to be.
But that's looking outward into the future.
That's pretty close.
Okay.
And so is the
so
60.
How many do you have right now?
Total, I don't have an exact number, but we have about 100 at Eureka Rescue Mission for the men. We have 75-ish for the women and children side of Eureka Rescue Mission. We have 40 at the Blue Angel Village. We have the 12 at Betty's Family Shelter. 22, I think it is. The place next to the day center. I would guesstimate about 25 there. What am I missing? And those are just shelter spaces. They're not, like the Bayview where we have, veterans or the future thing there. That's just shelter spaces that we have right now.
And St. Vincent de Paul.
Oh, and St. Vincent. So, and then St. Vincent has the overflow shelter of 25. And that one is not gender-based or anything like that. Typically, that one, when it gets full, is on the women's side, is because that's what ends up getting full at Eureka Rescue Mission. The rescue mission on the men's side, I'm not saying this isn't, that we have enough shelter space, but the men's side has not been full this whole winter.
Okay. And so some of the difficulty that's been brought up tonight, too, is, whether folks have animals. I don't think it was brought up tonight, but some of the things that I've heard are couples. Mm-hmm. Those are issues, getting access. So when we're looking at those, belongings, yeah. So when we're looking at those 150 plus beds, of those, how many are low barrier for people to access? Will they allow a pet?
Other than
Will they allow
those,
someone who's intoxicated?
Yes.
Okay.
And those are a big misnomer that people are putting out there. But yes, they allow people there. Can you do drugs in there? No. Can you come in inebriated or on drugs? Yes. So all of those allow for that.
All of those 150 plus beds allow for that.
I'll have to check with Betty's women and children's side, but I can tell you when she was opening up, she added an additional 10 beds at the Blue Angel Village and another 10 beds at her day center in that open space there. And at those times, there is no barrier on her side. I know the Eureka Rescue Mission does not have those barriers. So of those for couples, none. And for pets, none. And that's one of the reasons why this is so big for us to do something like this, so that you could have those barriers removed and have the appropriate mechanisms in place to make sure that those are taken care of. One good thing that is coming, and this is pending, is the day center. The day center will not only have kennels for dogs, but it will also have storage for folks. And that'll have a lot of accommodation. It'll also add another 12 beds.
And so when we're talking about low barrier access and we're looking at the temperatures that we have right now going on with the weather, what do we have in this emergent situation as people feel that they're being turned away? I mean, what other access do we have?
Well, they all have access unless they have the dog or they're a couple. I mean, if they're a couple, they can split up. I know that's difficult. I'm not saying that's a simple thing to do, but that is an option. The dogs are a problem and need to be addressed. We don't have anything in place right now to deal with that from a shelter perspective.
Right. And so when you highlighted that we have the potential to use more sites inland that would be available, or at least more property accessible inland, have we thought about utilizing the Muni or the Vets Hall in any of these situations?
We don't own the Vets Hall. That would be the county, and that's leased for the most part. The Muni is partially leased sometimes, and it has programming there. If we were to do that, we wouldn't have a Hoopsters program.
Okay. And have we, and I know this is something that...
and same could be said for the Adorney. There's a lot of programming at the Adorney that would no longer be available to the community.
Well, at least in terms of an encampment, and I know this is something that might come later this month, have we reached out to Eureka City Schools and asked about potentially leasing the Jacobs property?
So that is a possibility. We haven't done that, and most likely we haven't done that because it's, I would say, somewhat recently been abated, and we could only be able to do that more recently. But it's something we can bring up in the 2x2s and see whether they're not interested. I know that was brought up to them when they had ownership, and that was not approved.
I feel like I've taken up a lot of time at the moment, but I would say that I do approve of the placard use idea there too, for people using cars as their primary domicile. I did have a question going to that, which are the complaints that are being received from people who feel that, I guess, a vehicle's been abandoned in front of their house. That has been because of that 72-hour rule.
Typically, yeah, they're not, even if they're registered, they're supposed to be moved, but we wouldn't tow them for that. It would be a ticket likely if it was just for not moving. But, yeah, if it's unregistered and it's there for 72 hours, that it can be towed. We don't have the staff to do it to all of them, but, when they become to the point of calls for service that are reaching a certain level, we address it.
Mm-hmm. And so that 72-hour, would that be a code enforcement or would that be law enforcement response?
It's law enforcement for that. There's some assistance by code enforcement, but it's law enforcement that oversees that, and it's typically done by a volunteer group.
Okay. Thank you.
With assistance from EPD.
Councilmember Moulton.
You're next. Pardon me, thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Boy, what an evening. I just want to thank the staff for all their thoughtful responses. I would like to clarify something. I was a little confused about the ABZ regulations. I think I caught it going pretty quickly, talking about building codes when it comes to membrane shelters, aka tents. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that there needs to be essentially a pallet or a raised area. So if we do have a safe parking area or a safe camping area where allowing people to camp in tents, we would have to build infrastructure. Am I understanding this correctly? That would be a raised area with raised curbs to keep the tents up off the main ground?
Yes. And, as far as that being really elaborate, it doesn't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
You could use, thank you. She in my head. Pallets. And then for curbs, it wouldn't necessarily need, it wouldn't even be that difficult if we had to put in curbs. We work with asphalt concrete all the time, and we could put in curbs. We could assist with that. And then the raised of it could be done by pallets or some other pretty inexpensive way of doing it.
And the heating?
So the heating, it's based on a time frame, and I don't know exactly what it is. The heating part of it, I think there's an option to do a warming tent type of thing, but I'm not sure. But the heating would be something that we need to bring utilities in and bring something in. So whether that be like the floor, so you could put something into the pallet and have like a heating mat of something that would emanate heat.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be the most cost-effective way of doing it. The heaters, as Councilmember Bauer will tell you, have a lot of amperage and would be
Mhm.
really expensive.
So you say a warming tent, you mean maybe similar to the kitchen and bathroom and laundry facilities, there would be a central place that was accessible that people could go to warm, but then their own tents?
I believe so. I'd have to get back to you on that for sure. But there would be ways of doing it on the tents as well.
And so when we're talking about that, are we talking about then providing tents and bedding and everything that goes in the tent? Or are we talking about people bringing in their own stuff?
So, like I said, the city doesn't have the funds to do stuff like this. If we were to do this, it would take a grant to do this.
Mhm.
And that's why if we were to go after a grant for something like this, we would want it to be more permanent.
Mhm.
There would be a way if this was to be a pilot and people were low on money. I'm sure we could do some cost cutting. There's some pretty high heights that are required. And so the thought of bringing in your own tent and doing that, there would have to be some sort of adjustment to try and figure out how that would work. But from a perspective of purchasing tents, it's not that cost prohibitive.
Okay.
But, we also don't have the money to do it, budgeted, but I'm sure that we could use some of our grant funding for some of the services. We've been creative with that before and reached out to the county and said, hey, we want to use this money for this, and kind of earmark it from some other, service or equipment that we were going to buy and see if we could change that. So I'm sure we could assist in some way. I think that if we have an approved project and it's ready to go and we have a location, I don't think that it's not going to happen overnight,
Mhm.
but I don't think that funding's going to be difficult to get. The Home Key Grant, I think, is a huge opportunity. It's just finding the right location.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a good picture in my head of what an authorized encampment would look like. And it kind of sounds like it's more like a tiny house or tiny house village or trailers. It's just that maybe it's membrane shelters instead of
It can
rigid
be. If you
shelters.
look at the social media posts that we put up, that's a really good example of a compliant sanctioned encampment.
I saw
It's
that.
on pallets, and it has the very same tents at each location,
Uh-huh.
and they're all put up. Fortunately for them, that's in a warm climate area, so they don't have to worry about the heating component.
But what it is not is a field where people are allowed to come and pitch their own tent and set up their own stuff and, have their own little section to do with as they please, no matter.
No, that wouldn't be in compliance with the code. The code is pretty, if you look at it from a building code perspective, it's extremely lenient.
I see that.
It's
I'm just
not-
trying to get a clear picture in my head. One other question, actually two other questions. One, what is happening to the mobile showers? I realized that was a local nonprofit that was running those.
So AHA had that. The city approved the use of that at our Samoa boat launch location, and they were doing it for at least 4 years. They did it every
Little over 3, Nezzy says.
Yeah. So they were doing it there at our site. Nezzy AHA came and said that they were moving on to looking at an encampment and that they wouldn't be providing that services. And so in the interim, staff went out, applied for an HAP grant from the county, and were approved and received $115,000, and will be building permanent showers at Blue Angel Village over the next few months. And that will be made available not only to the tenants there, but also to all the community members.
So we'll have public showers, but they'll be in one spot.
Yes.
Okay. Nancy, what happened to the actual truck? The actual, yeah.
Well, right now they're in dry dock. They're getting all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. We'll talk about that later. Thank you. Now a question for the actual staff. When we talked about rotating camps and them being not safe for the people in them, I appreciate that you're trying to be delicate, but could you be specific?
It was really bad. We had assaults. We had extreme amount of drug activity. Rapes. It was bad.
Thank you. I do want to avoid creating blind spots where things can happen that people go to deliberately be outside the law.
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't a question, sorry.
Yeah, there has to be some oversight of it, and there has to be some accountability for it. What we were doing in those rotating campsites is we'd put them up, people would be there for a week, and then we'd send our staff in and spend an inordinate amount of time cleaning them up and putting into 40-yard dumpsters.
Mhm.
And then they would relocate to the next location, and we'd do it again the next week. The two locations, the one location where it was muddy was not a good spot for people to be at. It was the only other location that we had at the time. And at that time, we didn't have emergency shelter and all the provisions that we had in now, so we got away with using that coastal dependent industrial property. We couldn't now. The other two locations were same type of issues, but from a livability were a little bit better because they were both paved parking lots.
Okay, that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bauer?
I don't really have a lot of questions. I mean, this is an issue that has plagued the United States, right, for years now. I mean, we're going on, I guess, 2005, you know? And I agree with my fellow council members. We got to do something as quickly as possible. And luckily, with the Emergency Shelter Crisis Act, and the state had the foresight to actually give us some flexibility, which is a great thing. I think we're all disturbed by the fact that people are having to sleep outside in this cold climate that we have, this incredible winter we're having. And I just hope that we can move with all alacrity and get something done with the tools that we have. And you know, I hear and I listen to the public and wanting something done now. The challenge is funding, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about, is how do we get the funds quickly? And my thing would be, why isn't the state providing funds quickly? Every city gets an allotment based off of their population to implement whatever it takes to get people sheltered, and so we're stuck. This body is stuck with the rules that are set and the lack of funding, and we're going to do something. It's just a matter of how quickly we can do it, realizing that it is a crisis, and you can call it economic disaster camps. I mean, like so many of the great comments that I heard were it's a societal issue, right? I mean, how rents are high, but because jobs don't pay anything anymore, right? We lose industries left and right. Private equity picks the bones off of the companies that they absorb. And so, it's a bigger issue than just our little city here. And we'll do what we can. And I look forward to working with my fellow council members to get something done as quickly as we can. And I think we'll do the best we can. More of a statement than questions. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Councilmember Fernandez and then Councilmember Castellano.
I had two questions I forgot to ask. What is our relationship right now with the religious community, with churches in particular?
Good as it's ever been. It's fine.
Have we reached out to them? Have we reached out to them for property utilization?
We have in the previous ones, like when we did the RFP, we definitely reached out to them to see if their property would be available for something for use. It wasn't successful. We haven't reached out lately. I just want to, this is an ongoing thing for our staff, and I've been dealing with this for, well over a decade. And actually, since I was hired here in 2006, I was the first one who did the Mayday cleanup behind the mall. And so I've been around for a very long time. And I can tell you that this is something that's been on staff's to-do list, and it's not going to go away. But, we look at private property all the time. And I'm just hoping that at some point in time that comes to fruition to where we can find an appropriate place for it happen. It's been extremely frustrating, the amount of effort that we put in the 2014 to 2017 arena to try and get this done. We came to council, none of you were on the council at that time, but we came to council over and over again about proposals that were going to happen, and they never came to fruition. And a lot of that had to do with the NIMBYism and the pressure from the public. We're just hoping that the efforts that we put forth this time do come to fruition.
And so there was something that I think that you touched on earlier, was that there were camps, but they were rotated every 2 weeks, and that lasted about 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Approximately. I don't have an exact time, but it was approximately 6 months, and it was mainly because of the safety issues of the folks there.
Okay. And where it's been successful, at least in other parts of the country, it's 90 days. And I know that there was one particular ask tonight to not overlook or don't give up on rotation in particular. And so if we were to do something like that again, what might it look like? Which properties would we have to use?
We'd have to use the Link property and potentially this property next door to us.
Okay.
The parking lot, which...
Right, because that's one of the crucial issues there too, is stability.
Yeah, I mean, we still need to keep in mind that rotating parking lot needs to abide by those same building registers. Doing a rotation like that and having it move is going to be a significant staff. If I was to recommend, and I would talk to our staff about this, it would be better to do it at one location and keep it there, because moving pallets, moving heating equipment, moving all of those things in order to make that happen is going to be extremely difficult.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Castellano?
Let's see. I would be curious to hear what other council members thought of that kind of three or four part idea. But I know we're not making a decision, but just sort of like a consensus sort of idea. But also, okay. Gosh, it's been a while now. I had, many people may know, I used to rent a warehouse in Old Town, and for one winter when it was inclement weather, some people here in the audience helped support that project. We opened up the space and had all-night movies when the weather was really bad, and because we weren't running a shelter, we were just showing movies all night. Which was actually really successful. In a sort of like temporary random way. But I do feel like, sorry, this is a total tangent, but it's not. But I do feel like, I think in terms of staff energy, it'd be great to sort of prioritize these like bigger kind of changing a system kinds of plans. But I do feel like, what I'm hearing from Councilmember Hernandez is that there's a real need for something now, and so I'm thinking that Fernandez, sorry. You're like, God, Leslie. So anyway, but I was thinking about, well, what if we partner with, with a community organization on something like that? I mean, not at, like the Adorni Center or something where it's, like all night movies, and we get 20 dog kennels. There's not that many people with dogs that would, I feel like 20 dog kennels would probably, anyway, maybe we don't need to solve this whole issue right now in this moment. But anyway, I'm just kind of curious about something like that, like also like what we could do next week idea.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Okay. So I have some. I've been waiting so patiently. I know. Yes, I can. And I'm going to. First of all, I want to just share an appreciation for the way that this meeting went. It's true. It could have gone a way different way, and I really appreciate everybody's willingness to be respectful and kind with their comments for the most part. That really focuses us in a better direction, I think, to get things done. So I just want to share that appreciation, and I hope we can continue to have this respectful dialogue, because I think that's really how we get things done. The other thing that I want to say, well, there's a few things, but I feel frustrated by this situation only in that I think, there are a lot of things that happen that keep us stuck. And one of those things is I was thinking of, as everybody was talking, I was thinking about that meeting that we had at the Runenberg Hall several years ago to put a day center in. And I just remember how mean people were about it. They were just cruel. They were making people that were giving presentations cry, and it was just awful and ugly. And I'm so thankful that that's not happening now. But there still is that kind of attitude out there that, not in my backyard. We don't want to see these people in our neighborhoods. We don't want this in our neighborhoods. And the thing is that, we have to, we don't have to. But something that I practice personally is separating the person from their living situation, from their addiction, from a person is not just where they live or how they live. They're not just their addiction. They're not just anything. We're all complex and we're all conglomerate of the things that we've had in our experience and the way that we live. And I think that we're more similar than we are different in so many levels. And our feelings are the same. We might end up acting or living differently, but that doesn't mean that we don't all have the same kind of pain and joy and love and hate that people experience. And so, I think it's really important to remember, at least for me, that all people have value. All of us have value, every single one of us. And so getting these conversations moving forward and supporting this is really important for our community. I really believe a healthy community lifts people up. It doesn't exploit people. It doesn't, point out what's wrong with everybody and show videos of people on the street, having a mental health crisis. That's just so upsetting to me. So those are the kinds of things that are frustrating to me, is how we treat people. And the fact that people are out there right now. So, I feel like everybody, we want it done. And we have, tonight we had a lot of people here, which is really, I'm so grateful for that. But oftentimes, we have a lot of folks that are on social media or wherever they're at, and they want it done now, and they're not willing to show up and participate. And we're in a crisis that we all need to be participating. We all need to pick up an oar and say, I can do this portion, or I can do this portion, or how can I be supportive in this volunteer position, or whatever it might be. And you know what it might be? It might just be giving somebody a smile and looking them in the face. It might be that simple, because people feel invisible when we're out there like that. And it's no way to really, it's upsetting. So I love the conversation that we've had tonight, and I hope that we continue to have these conversations, and not only have these conversations, but find ways in the near future to find solutions for folks to be indoors. And the last thing I'll say tonight is that another thing that's really frustrating about this is that we cannot manufacture a willingness. I know I say that a lot, but unfortunately, even if we had resources for everyone, there's still going to be a population that isn't capable or isn't willing. They just can't do it. And they deserve the same kindness that everyone else does. Pick up an oar, join us. Let's move forward in our community and do good things, because that's the city I live in, and I hope you'll join me. So with that, if there are no more questions or comments, we will adjourn the meeting. Thanks again, everybody. We have a question and a comment. Last word.
I guess I did kind of ask if there was consensus around any of these ideas that put forward, and so I don't know. Is that appropriate from a city attorney's perspective?
No.
No. Okay. All right then. Well then.
Sorry, I love doing that to you, Councilmember Castellano. So I would just say that we did advertise this as a certain kind of meeting, and I wouldn't want to make decisions that made other members of the community feel like we weren't listening to them as well. And so I think that if there are some ideas, and there were lots, that we would bring them back to another meeting for decision making. So if you wanted to do that kind of poll, I'd be okay with it, but certainly not decision making. Yeah,
that's the kind of poll I meant.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We are on the same page. So bringing things back to another meeting, yes, I think we can do that.
That was definitely what I was indicating.
Got it.
You could bring it up during council. When we bring things forward for new business.
Future agenda items.
Future agenda items. Thank you.
Could we provide
City Manager Slattery?
Sorry. Could we provide any direction to staff to look into something?
Not tonight.
Okay. That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. Or you can wait till the council meeting on Tuesday and put it under your, what was it?
Future agenda
items.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this is the mayor's purview, so I will defer to her on that.
Fair enough.
So do you want to bring it up next meeting? Tuesday? Okay. Thank you. All right, with that, any more comments or questions? We're adjourned. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good night.